Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. We have a big stream today, not really in the amount of topics, but in the monumental nature of one of the leaks in quite the most direct sense of the word. Usually, if leaks, we talk about more like journalistic work and people like Mark Gurman telling us what like the specs are going to be of a next generation product, maybe some photos from the assembly line or something like that. Very rarely we get like huge blockbuster stuff like the iPhone 4, of course, famously being left in a bar and then somebody just, what is this? At the time when, of course, smartphones were relatively modern, so it was, of course, sticking out. I think these days it probably wouldn't that way. And yeah, but today we actually have real leaks in the sense, and this is again, I'm using Twitter, but this is coming from Shure Papel Pro, who I like mostly, like for his or her leaks or their, and they're saying I saw some sellers said they have 200 units of M4 MacBook Pro in stock. This is probably the biggest warehouse leakage I've ever seen. Wow. Why are we talking about this? Well, it seems like Russia, a state that famously doesn't really care much about the law of intellectual property or international law or rules of armed conflict, seems to have gotten its hands on the M4 MacBook Pro that we have, of course, been discussing up and down on this channel for the last couple of weeks and months. We, of course, are awaiting its official announcement during the October event. And it now so happens that some people, probably like 2 weeks before the event and around 3 weeks before, like Mark Gurman said that like those devices will come out on November 1st, like basically a month before all of that, we now have people unboxing the M4 MacBook Pro, which is absolutely insane. Now, I'm not gonna watch the video with you guys because I believe that shit will be taken down fast. I think the only thing that prevents that from happening is the fact that the guy who did that has like a 12 million sub channel. And Relay, I see you in the chat. Welcome, brother. Welcome to everyone who is already watching. I know I do these streams without long preparations. There isn't like a regular schedule. So I'm really, really glad whenever you guys can join. I know it's not easy. I know you all have your daily schedules. So thank you so much for tuning in, making these live chats lively, giving me suggestions, giving me something to debate on. I always appreciate having you guys here. Now, let's talk about that crazy unboxing video. Apple is expected to debut M4 Max later this month with an expected launch on November 1st. So that's all the stuff we've talked about because of Mark Gurman. A new unboxing video, there are now actually two. There is also like a YouTube short by another Russian channel, or at least a Russian speaking channel. And I speak Russian, so I watch those videos. I know some people have asked me, what are they saying? They aren't saying anything crazy, like especially this guy. Like he is a regular freaking, like he's an MKBHD like 12 million reviewer YouTuber, and like he reviews everything from foldables, regular smartphones, laptops. Like he has a pretty regular schedule at which he releases videos in. It's amazing that these guys have the gall to really like talk about like devices that were clearly stolen, because guys, it's way too early for these to be review units. Second, Apple does not operate in Russia in its regular capacity anymore. Like they don't sell through like regular channels or anything. Like iPhones, Macs that might come into Russia are usually smuggled through Armenia or Azerbaijan or Belarus. So, for one, he wouldn't have gotten an official review unit. But even if it had been, nobody's crazy enough to permanently break their relationship. Don't forget, if you break a review embargo, you aren't just breaking your relationship with that specific company. You're likely making yourself persona non grata for literally every other tech company who might have given you like a review unit otherwise. So we are clearly talking, and this is why I started with the tweet from Shrimp MacBook Pro. We are talking about devices that were at some point stolen from a warehouse. Again, probably not a Russian warehouse, but probably like a source that is either very close to Russia or maybe even planned on shipping to Russia. So again, the usual suspects would be kind of like all the, like not all the former Soviet republics, but many of them who still have some close relationships to Russia and who aren't under the same kind of sanctions as Russia is, and who still might have regular shipments from Apple. For example, one big example for such behavior was actually that shipments of Mercedes cars to Armenia and Azerbaijan, like they increased by like 1,000, sometimes 10,000%, so 10 times more, 100 times more, and you basically can guess where those expensive cars were driving to in the end. And similar to that with Apple technology, all these regions surrounding Russia, they now have slightly suspiciously high Apple orders because, and obviously this is the most nefarious example of that because this goes against any rules. Like obviously these countries are still kind of open to trade with Russia. They're just not able to give them officially Apple's tech, because obviously to resell something like that as a shop yourself, you would need some kind of license from Apple. But this is actually stolen goods. So this is like an international crime in a way. And I know that when you consider, of course, people are starving across the world, shit like that, there are wars, downright genocides like in Sudan and stuff like that. Like, of course, like even like company espionage and stuff like that doesn't really matter. But as somebody who follows Apple, this is just so crazy to me. And especially the blatant nature to see it just come on YouTube is absolutely just mind-blowing. Tipo Master, Tipo reporting for duty, accepted. Probably the most severe leak coming through you is saying of Apple device. Yeah, this is the biggest leak things since like the iPhone 4. At least like I would say like the iPhone 4 leak was probably as substantial when it comes to like real world access. Like somebody literally can unbox and analyze the product. But the iPhone 4, for one, it wasn't, I believe, a 100% finished prototype. And second, like the iPhone 4, what makes it so monumental is that it was like a complete redesign. The smartphone category was relatively new, right? This is what, in my opinion, still elevates the iPhone 4 over the MacBook Pro. But when it comes to the legal stuff, this is 100 times worse. Like the iPhone 4 stuff was just somebody being stupid, probably getting a little drunk and forgetting it at the bar. This is like, I would call it industrial espionage if it was designed to like feed data to some other company. But at this point, it's just fucking theft. And that's disgusting to me. By the way, guys, please look at my thumbnail, like where I put the Russian flag. I know most of you don't pay attention to shit like that, but you can look at my outfits and my thumbnails. Like they have two very distinct colors on them. So you can guess where I sit on the Russia-Ukraine war stuff. Yeah, just saying. Yeah, and this is something that is hitting like regular consumers. Like my grandma called me after work and was like, have you heard about this? Because she's originally from Belarus, now lives here in Germany. And she's like, that's totally crazy. Like, how did this happen? And I'm like, yeah, probably one of those unofficial leaks, and probably some people who just couldn't keep their hands for themselves and just had to unpack it, had to show it to the world. I mean, if you go actually here, the video has around 400,000 views in a day. It's not crazy when it comes to a channel with that many subscribers, but I've seen that like his average viewership of per video isn't even as high as one might think for a 12 million sub channel. I'll briefly look into some of it because it's just crazy. Guys, as I mentioned now several times, I do speak Russian. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll tell you what he says, but I don't want to watch the entire video.
World premiere.
World premiere. By the way, that's the Xbox intro, so that's stolen too. Just want to say, you can see like iPad Pro, that's probably the M4 version, everything considered. Major demo saying, do you think the M4 MacBook Air, I assume, will also have 16 gigabytes or 12 gigabytes like the iPad Pro was having 12, but been down to 8? That's actually a really, really smart question. Thank you, Major Demo. I actually couldn't tell you. Like, I guess this would be just like a coin toss at this point for Apple, because now they would have like Tipo Master. Yeah, I'm not gonna read out that word, but I appreciate it. And the point is, if Apple has the supply chain for both like two 6 gigabyte modules, right, which would make up the memory inside the M4 iPad Pro, and also the supply for two 8 gigabyte modules for like 16 gigabytes, like that to me is just like, okay, I guess Apple ordered both, or maybe they ordered first the 12 gigabytes and then were unhappy about it, so they binned it down, and now on Macs they're just going with 16 by default. I really couldn't tell you, because it really depends on stuff like, where does Apple see the pricing of the MacBook Air, right? Where do they see the potential for maybe even lowering the price to get down to like around $9.99 and stuff like that. So it's really hard to tell. I guess we'll kind of have to wait for Mark Gurman to commit to something. And of course, there's also the question, what will they do with storage? Because obviously the MacBook Pro here is getting a RAM upgrade, but not a storage upgrade. So if they upgrade both RAM and storage, even if they upgrade RAM only half the way, what is going to be the price difference at that point that Apple targets between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro? It's just crazy. Royost, you're saying it's surprising that the video isn't being blocked. Yes, that's insane. I totally, when I read about it like 3-4 hours ago, I was like, oh my god, that video must have been already taken down and shit like that. And it's like, nope, it's still up there. It's obviously this is I pre-downloaded it, but it's still like licensed, so I can still watch it on YouTube, so it hasn't been taken down. So he unboxes it. It has the same wallpaper as the last gen, but people also pointed out that the M1 MacBook Pro and the M2 MacBook Pros had the same wallpaper as well. So that's not a criteria against this being realistic. Where does he show the back? So he takes it out. Color matched MagSafe cable, 70 watt power brick, so the same like basic stuff you get with the current $1,599 MacBook Pro. He does not comment on the existence of the potential other configurations. One thing that does lend to believability of this is the fact that in his unboxing there are no Apple stickers, which given that Apple just stopped providing stickers with the latest iPhone, I don't know if like a leaker would be so well informed on the entire process to actually like even prepare the like the packaging this way, so it doesn't have like stickers. Major Demo saying, I think if they kept the price of $1,600 for the base M4 MacBook Pro, then the MacBook Air will have 16 gigabytes. But if the MacBook Pro MacBook Pro with M4 has a price increase, yeah, my assumption is similar, is that if they increase price by $100, but now it's 16 gigabytes, then I think they would have a good excuse to keep the MacBook Air at its current price and give it 12 gigs of RAM. However, that is pretty much the worst case scenario, because well, it's the worst case scenario in still a slightly positive scenario where Apple increases memory. I still would love Apple to bump up storage on the MacBook Air as well. At this point, if Apple bumped the memory from 8 to 16 gigabytes and the storage from 256 to 512, I think they could easily get away with an $11.99 starting price. And I think that would be just instantly a great seller, because people wouldn't be looking at it and thinking, oh my God, I have to pay $400 more to actually make it viable. So Apple does have some levers here to pull. And the reason why I always suggest it, I know that Apple likes their margins, but I'm trying to tell Apple time and time again, if you really want to encourage developers to develop more, especially games, but also in general, like high performance, like 3D artist apps and stuff like that, and if you want for people to actually buy that stuff on MacBooks, you need better RAM, but especially in a way, even better storage configurations. Because when you think about a game like Call of Duty, that's by itself like 150 gigabytes on PC or something crazy like that. So yeah, I fully understand where you're coming from. His video is legit because those Geekbench are found in Geekbench, even the metal scores. Yeah, we're gonna go through the benchmarks a little later. So here is his M4 iPad Pro, the 11-inch version, delivering some pretty solid results, close to 3800 in single core, a little over, close to 15,000 in multi-core. You can see the MacBook does fire up. It does have the full software release, so this is not like some super bricked like prototype. Does let itself get fully set up from stores and stuff like that, Touch ID. It should be noted that when you look at System Configurator, I don't know if he does it or the other guy, it does mention that this is a November 2024 product. So it, at least in that way, it also lines up with what Mark Gurman said, that the M4 devices and the iPad mini would start official sales on November 1st. He does show you all the like regular settings, does set up some shit up for his keyboard, like he likes some shortcuts in a different way. Realizing the numbers are nice, hope the temps are nice as well. I wonder, because the M4 iPad Pro has better cooling than the M2 iPad Pro, by 20% according to Apple. Like, I wonder if Apple bothered to improve cooling on the MacBook Pro, given that it does have active cooling. So I wonder if Apple was just, you know what, if it actually does consume somewhere like a few watts more, you know what, the fan will run a tiny bit louder. Like, let's not increase pricing here further or at least not increase cost by giving it that much more cooling and shit like that. Guys, we've been streaming for about 20 minutes, so small shout out to, if you are enjoying the content, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it, comment. I love engaging with a lively live chat, love when you guys are a little more riled up and emotional as seemingly you are today, as am I to a degree, even though I'm really, really tired. And of course, as always, if you want to support this channel directly, please consider leaving a super chat or a super sticker. Any small donation goes a long way to support this channel. Also, you can become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Max, Maximus, and Angelica, who are all both MarkTech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. And you can become a supporter over on Patreon. Thank you so, so much. Realizing I want the throw, I hate the fan. That makes no sense. If you hate the fan, then you like the air all the more. That's not a sentence structure where though is like your syntax and your semantics are fighting each other. Oh, he actually speaks. I never mentioned that. I never saw that it didn't fully turn off volume. So these are the results of, I believe this is his M1, no, MacBook Pro. Oh, that's the M3 Max MacBook Pro, so close to 3,000 in single core. This is, by the way, pretty much the exact single core result I just got on my A17 iPhone 15 Pro after the latest iOS 18.1 beta. So that's quite cool. And of course, we know it does deliver around 21,000 in multi-core. Really nice results. However, if you're somebody who wants to future-proof your devices, this just shows that there is no real way to do that, right? Close to 3,900 in single core. You could probably get it to 4,000, maybe even, and over 15,000 in single core. So in that way, it actually matches and to a degree exceeds the results of the M3 Pro in terms of multi-core results. Now, of course, it's slower in multi-core than the M3 Max, but don't forget, M3 Max is way more expensive, consumes way more power, needs more cooling, stuff like that. So the fact that this fits, like, I'm not saying the M4 MacBook Pro is like an exceptionally thin or light product, but the fact that this can just be slided into a device that already had like the M3, and this probably will not negatively impact battery life or anything like that, especially since it actually has more efficiency cores. That to me is just great. And really, yeah, I do agree that I do want nice temps on it, but Apple Silicon to me has always been nicely managed in real world. Like, I know that when you look at actual die temperatures, like sometimes Apple will allow it to get quite hot before they actually ramp up active cooling, but usually you won't feel that. Like, I know that from my M1 Max MacBook Pro. Realizing I have an i7 Gen 9, so you can see where I'm coming from. Well, yeah, oh, so you had an Air still that had the fan. That's what you meant. Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah, so those are the CPU results. I don't know if he actually ran GPU results too, or if they just were leaked. Oh yeah, he actually has. So what MacBook Air is that? So that's open. That's I believe he tests with OpenCL, not with Metal. So that's it just says OpenCL score. So that's the graphics score. I highly encourage you guys, whenever you actually test Geekbench, like for graphics, please use Metal. OpenCL is so useless these days. Like, it's a nice, interesting legacy product, I guess, considering that this was like a really notable Apple contribution to the open source community. Like, to those who don't know, OpenCL was actually created by Apple and then open sourced to the Kronos group, who does oversee projects like that, and nowadays Vulkan. But nothing really happened, unfortunately, with OpenCL. Apple tried to make it work, but at the time when they were still using like AMD GPUs, then they switched to Metal. They kind of ported Metal to their AMD GPUs too, but overall, yeah, OpenCL is not a very it's not a very good test here. That being said, what we can say actually is about scaling, and that is the fact that now this is I assume an MM2 MacBook Air, given that it's a 2022 model. We have 38,000. In a similar test here, we do get around 30,000 for the M3 MacBook Pro. So we get a roughly 25% uplift, which is quite nice. And it does actually go a little bit beyond, like, I joke all the time that Apple sometimes seems to just love scaling their shit with memory bandwidth, but this would even outpace a little bit the 17% increase in memory bandwidth. Tippermaster, he did both. Metal score went up this morning, I think. That's nice. I don't think I really, like... I think the scaling just makes sense. I think the specific benchmarks don't matter to me, especially since I always say that Geekbench for the GPU, like Geekbench Compute, isn't a particularly good test indicative of gaming performance. It's a decent test for like raw compute and maybe for some games, but especially we're also still seeking answers for what does it mean for ray tracing. Like infamously, Apple doubled ray tracing performance between the A17 Pro and the A18 Pro, and we don't know if that will be repeated for the M4 versus the M3. So there's a lot of interesting stuff coalescing together here. Now, the other point about the specifications about this device is the performance does make sense. It's a little bit higher than the M4 iPad Pro. Makes sense. This is an active cooling product, just in general, more cooling too. But there is one change here, and he does show here the M3 Pro and M3 Max devices. Why? Well, it's because they do have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, and this does seem to be one of the changes. If he nicely could show the device from the side, please. Is that this MacBook Pro does feature 3 Thunderbolt ports as well. Oh, well, I don't even need to show you. Wait. There. On this side, the current M3 MacBook Pro does not have this extra Thunderbolt port, right? That port is basically reserved for the M3 Pro and M3 Max. I always say these devices have more PCIe lanes. This is why they can give you extra Thunderbolt ports. This is why they're happy to utilize faster storage and stuff like that. I would love actually to see if maybe storage speeds changed or something like that. But we have seen die shots that suggest that the M4 has like double the Thunderbolt controllers and like more display controllers. So it strongly suggests there's a 3rd Thunderbolt 4 port here. This is actually part of the leaked page that he showed off. Where is it? Well, here.
Gigabytes of RAM.
Nope, no thanks. I don't need you full screen.
And I want to understand
Okay, so he doesn't like to fully show it off. Yeah, you have to zoom in. This is why I come prepared. Major demo. I was shocked when I discovered that Apple was the one who invented LTPO technology in their 2017 iPad Pro. Yes, it was basically a joint venture between them and LG. And I don't even know how they treat patents for that. It seems like Apple is really happy to just basically like let the company like who works with them mostly keep the patent. But they basically like guarantee supplies for themselves. And JTKR, I don't think I've seen your name here. Welcome to the chat, brother. Do you know that Apple is the only company to use LTPO in LCD displays? I knew that's what they were doing. I didn't know that nobody else ever bothered, but I guess I'm not surprised given that like when it comes to just like high quality IPS panels, like everybody else just feels like they don't treat IPS with the appropriate like respect, or I guess VA would be Samsung's alternative kind of to LG's IPS. So yeah, I knew that was happening like after the 2017 iPad Pro, but to know that it's still that way is actually a little bit crazy. So maybe Apple does like tell LG basically don't supply that tech to other devices, and I guess that would explain some of the fact that for a mini LED panel like the one I have on my MacBook Pro, they do perform really well in battery life. Like we know mini LED is not as efficient as OLED or God forbid tandem OLED, but it does seem like when we look at competitors who, for example, make like gaming laptops and they either would choose like just like a high refresh panel, whether it's OLED or a standard LCD. Some tried mini LED, but mini LED usually does fuck a little bit with the refresh rate capabilities, like with the response time capabilities, I should be correct. And the energy efficiency was just terrible on those mini LED panels. And they didn't even offer quite the same brightness levels as Apple did basically from day one. So yeah, it's cool. Like Apple does offer advanced technology. It's just people like even like Apple speakers, right? Like on the MacBook Pro, like I still struggle to find anything that gets even close to it, especially in a similar form factor. And I feel like people just ignore that stuff. Tipomas saying, yeah, that's how they work with Corning too. True. Steve Jobs famously, like after Apple internally developed the original iPhone with a plastic screen, and Steve Jobs was like infamous for like basically saying, oh, do that. Then he would try it out and he would hate it and he would probably get you fired. But he tried plastic and he said, nope, 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 nope. And they basically instantly called the only company that was even remotely doing shit like that at that point, said like, Corning, we are working here on something cool. Do you want to supply us with something that is glass, but also like really good for touchscreen capacitive input? And of course, Corning, like that's what started the modern Corning. Like all the different variation. Like I remember back in the day, like we now have like Gorilla Glass Victus and Victus 2, I guess. But back in the day, we had like a new generation of Corning glass. Like every couple of months, it almost felt like. And smartphone manufacturers were like chasing the latest generation of Corning glass. Yeah, it's pretty cool how much tech Apple has influenced over the years. Tandem OLED and MacBook Pro still too far off. Yeah, it's either like I believe Mark Gurman originally said that it's a 2026 thing. However, there is a chance that, well, I still would say it's a 2026 thing, but Mark Gurman said it's earliest 2026. However, some recent reports from Ross Young have suggested that tandem OLED demand is not that great. Mainly meaning that the 13-inch iPad Pro isn't selling too well. So my hope is that because Apple does have supply chains with basically obligatory minimum orders, unless they want to pay a penalty like they did not too long ago to Samsung. I really hope they just say, you know what, mini LED is fine. Let's just maybe give like one generation of MacBook Air or mini LED or a mini LED or something like that. But let's use tandem OLED as early as possible. Maybe earliest possible will mean late 2026, and that is going to be Tipomaster, as you suggest, on the M6 MacBook Pro. But yeah, who knows? YTK are saying, what's also shocking that Samsung only used LTPO on their S24 series for the very first time, but the Ultra started it in the S21. That is correct as well. Nice, very well-informed chatter joining the live stream. Yes, it was like almost insulting by the time we got to the S23 generation that Samsung still was using LTPS panels, which is basically worse. I'm not an expert here, but it doesn't give you all the nice variable refresh rate stuff from LTPO. Basically, LTPO makes your screen faster and more versatile in a way, and more efficient too. And with more efficiency, you can usually push brightness a little higher. So yeah, in general, LTPO is just better. But yeah, and Samsung was like, look, we have this revolutionary tech, and that was kind of a response even in a way to like Apple's 2017. Wait, was it 2017? Oh yeah, actually, the first ProMotion iPads actually were not the redesigned A12X iPad Pros. Those were actually the A10X iPad Pros. That's correct. Yeah, and yeah, people were like, "Oh, now the era of LTPO OLED has begun." like, that Lord of the Rings meme with like the really disfigured orc killing like a man. He's like, the era of men has ended, the time of orcs has begun, or something like that. I usually watch Lord of the Rings in German, so forgive me if my self-made translation isn't perfect. Yeah, and I think that people really expected like LTPO to basically instantly take over an OLED, but supply was so limited that it took until the iPhone 13 Pro for LTPO to even be in good enough supply to supply a Pro level iPhone, right? Because Apple has so many tens of millions of sales, and by the time they actually added ProMotion to the Pros, it made the Pros, of course, even more popular, because enthusiasts were saying like, oh, the gap between iPhone 12 and 12 Pro was like super small, but suddenly the gap between iPhone 13 and 13 Pro felt super big. And yeah, LTPO ProMotion was a big part of that. And once Apple got LTPO to work all the way down to 1 hertz on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, that's when they got always on display going, because that made the screen all the more efficient. Yeah, so thank you to 95 Mac to actually zooming in on what this guy showed. For one, we do have a confirmation here about 16 gigs of memory. It's interesting to note, but it shouldn't be surprising at this point, is that we have only seen 16 gigabyte configurations. So no 8 gigabytes, no 12 gigabytes, nothing like that. And we have seen 512 gigabytes. This does suggest that this will be the base configuration. After everything that Mark Gurman said and stuff like that, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I hope that Apple doesn't increase pricing, certainly not by $200, because that would pretty much negate all the benefits of a higher base configuration. But yeah, it's interesting. For one, we do have the fully enabled M4 chip, so there is no M4 Pro or M4 Max here, so we at least know that the Geekbench results are not skewed here in any way. We do keep the 14.2-inch diagonal liquid Retina XDR display with ProMotion technology, which is Apple's wording for a mini LED screen with 120 Hz maximal refresh rate and variable refresh rate technology. 3024 by 1964, that's the resolution we have. 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, so it's nice to not just see the port, of course, on the device, but actually, because obviously that could be slightly cheated. Granted, this could also be cheated, but once it all comes together, it makes some sense to me. And yeah, so 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, lining up with the rumors that, of course, Apple now does have more Thunderbolt/display controllers on the M4 die. We do keep the HDMI port. Still don't know if the base version finally gets HDMI 2.1. An SDXC card slot. Again, no wording on what generation of SDXC. MagSafe 3, headphone jack, and size and weight are roughly in line with what we already have. Shipping with a 70-watt USB-C power adapter and a USB-C to MagSafe 3 cable. Again, nothing surprising here, but interesting, right? Especially considering that we do, of course, have all those Mark Gurman reports that now do line up with what we're seeing here. Of course, the MacBook Air, we've talked about it. Whether or not it would need a price drop, or maybe Apple would do like a mid-gen like spec change on the MacBook Air, giving it more RAM or something like that. That remains to be seen, how this MacBook Pro like shakes up the entire portfolio. It's also interesting, especially considering one specific product, and that is the Mac Mini. Because the Mac Mini right now is super duper cheap by Apple standards. I know it's not, but you guys know what I mean. So if we go to buy, right, so it starts currently with actually a fully enabled M2, 8 gigs of memory and 256 gigs of storage at $599. I wonder if like Apple would give it actually 16 gigs of RAM, because Mark Gurman said that every M4 device in testing did have like 16 or 32 gigs of memory. If Apple gives it 16 gigs of memory at the same $600, and like, God, Apple, please drop the price difference from 256 gigs to 512, but to just $100. It's ridiculous. You can buy entire PCIe 4 like NVMe drives with a terabyte for $90 at this point. Yeah, but like this would be crazy value, and of course then the rest would have to change, because a big part of like the value of the Pro chip here is that it has more memory. So it's hard to tell how the entire lineup will have to change with that. YTK are saying the real question is, will MacBook Air get a third Thunderbolt port also? Well, I would suspect yes. And I think that one part about that is actually, when you look at the MacBook Air, it just looks a little barren on the other side. The MacBook Pro, even the one that doesn't have a USB-C port on that side, right? It does have the headphone jack, the HDMI port, and the SDXC card slot. So, but the MacBook Air only has the headphone jack here, a port that for some users is pretty much useless, because like if you want to look here, I use USB-C headphones. I do have a 3.5 pair still somewhere too, but it doesn't really make any difference to me. Thankful, like while I'm streaming, I actually am using all three Thunderbolt ports. I'm not using them as Thunderbolt ports, more like just as USB-C ports. But like I have my headphones, I have my microphone, and I have a cable going to my iPhone, so my iPhone doesn't have to wirelessly do continuity camera, and so it can keep charging during it. On the MacBook Air, of course, it would be great to have the same thing, and I'm charging through the MagSafe port. Roy is saying, if Mac Mini have the 32 gig spec, then that's gonna be your desktop of choice. That's amazing. Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't have a 32 gig configuration. The question will be, what will be the price difference between 16 and 32 gigabytes? Tipple Masters, is 8 gigabytes dead for the Air 2 or just the Pro? Again, no confirmation from Mark Gurman, so like who I call like our Apple rumor Jesus. So I really couldn't tell you, unfortunately. I hope that it will be at least 12 gigabytes. And yes, that like iPad Pro rumor about it having like 2 modules that are essentially 8 gig modules, but they're 6 gig modules. So technically you would have like 12 gigabytes in the base configuration, but it actually ends up being only 8 in software. So yeah, I don't know if maybe Apple will use those components for the MacBook Air, because usually Apple kind of sees the iPad Pro and the MacBook Air more as like very similar products spec-wise. And then the MacBook Pro would only get the unbinned chips, even larger memory capacities, things like that. Really, I wonder if the Air is going to be binned. Yes. Just out of cooling necessity, I would argue that yes, Apple will have an unbinned M4 inside the MacBook Air, especially if they increase cooling on it, similar to what they did on the M4 iPad Pro. But I would bet that there will still be like that binned version with 3 performance cores and 6 efficiency cores, similar to what we have on the M4 iPad Pro. And the idea would be that probably nobody's who's buying a MacBook Air will actually feel the difference. YTKR saying, why Apple hate to use USB A in laptops? Well, I hate USB A in laptops because I want the industry to move on. I mean, how long has it been since we got our first USB-C devices? Like, it's been since the 2015 12-inch MacBook, right? And then, of course, like infamously, people expected the iPhone 10, the big redesign, to come with the same port, USB-C, still kept Lightning, and then it kept happening year after year after year until finally the iPhone 15 got rid of Lightning. But Thunderbolt, like, like Apple, I guess, just likes having fast, versatile ports, and USB-A is not that. Like, don't forget, USB-A is dead as like something that is still being developed. Like, it maxes out, I believe, at 20 gigabytes per second, which isn't bad. It does have a pretty limited amount of like a power that it can give in like a very small product, unless you build like a very deliberate power brick around it. But that's not really compliant with the power delivery standards that Apple is targeting for like their devices. So I really don't know, what would the USB-A port give you that an occasional like accessory wouldn't help you out with, right? Like an adapter. I know this is like, I still maintain that like, I like MagSafe, and it has saved my butt actually a couple of times when I tripped over my own cable, because apparently I'm a stupid fucking moron. But yeah, when I look at MagSafe, I still would have just liked an extra USB-C port. YT, yeah, I know one is more than enough, but the problem is that ends up holding back, because now people will use everything in that one port, right? And people will then buy like adapters for their USB, for the rest of their USB-C ports, because their like accessory family will be kept firmly in the USB-A realm. Like, this is the problem. It's something that really has to, it's the same stuff with the idea, like, why does Apple hate the floppy disk? Like, the floppy disk holds data. Not every USB-A accessory holds data or something like that. At some point, you have to get rid of older stuff, in my opinion, just so the rest can move on. And I know it's not as pronounced. I'm not saying that the floppy disk is as bad, is as reasonable a demand as USB-A port is. But I still like... I do actually have a good argument for why not. And that argument is actually, there is no room for USB-A inside an iPhone or an iPad. So if you actually want a fully unified ecosystem, you should just double and triple down on USB-C. However, there are products where Apple agrees with you. The iMac, looking at the tech specs, looking at the back of the device. What is that? Oh no, that's all Thunderbolt ports now? Wait, do they not have USB-A ports anymore in the iMac? Oh, they do have. Yeah, they do have. Wait. Oh no, those are just slow USB 3 ports. Oh my god, good on you, Apple, to have gotten rid of USB-A here. Then the Mac Mini, I believe, still has some. La 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 la. Yeah, the Mac Mini still gives you 2 USB-A ports. And of course the Mac Studio and the so it's basically the desktop Macs, but even not the iMac anymore. I guess I just thought that the slow ports on the back were USB-A, but good to know. I always learn with you guys. Yeah, so you get 2 USB-A ports here, and then on the Mac Pro, because I believe it has like this module, right, that that port where ports go in. Where is it? Oh my god, it's so this is why Apple doesn't like the Mac Pro. It's just, even from every like website perspective, it's just more complicated. Expansion. Here, I assume this will be internal connection, 1 USB-A port. Additional connection. There, 2 USB-A ports. 5 gigabits per second. So Apple doesn't even like fully utilize what you can do with USB-A. But YT, if you ask why does Apple not like USB-A, my argument is that because Apple firmly looks at iPhone and iPad as very integral parts of the ecosystem, they want to only have ports that also make sense on the iPhone. When it comes to like display output and managing stuff from an SD card slot, that is something that Apple could see being still valuable for the pros. maybe something that doesn't even have like a direct response by USB-C. I mean, technically HDMI 2.1 is actually faster than Thunderbolt 4. Thunderbolt 4 gives you up to 40 gigabits per second. HDMI 2.1 gives you up to 48 gigabits per second. Of course, as using just SD cards, that makes it easier so that you can just take them out of your camera. Maybe you don't have the cable to connect your camera to your laptop. I still don't need HDMI or SD card slot, but I kind of get the thinking behind them being for pros. But USB-A is not for pros. USB-A is just for people who haven't fully moved on, unfortunately. By the way, the reason why I can say those things is like, this is not a $500 netbook, right? Like, people who buy a MacBook can afford one single like dongle that will give you USB-A connectivity if you really need it. Like, don't buy Macs if like like your wallet prohibits you from owning a USB-A dongle. That being said, I of course understand more of the just the quality of life argument that, oh, I want all my ports in one device. But at that point, you are buying an Apple device. Don't forget, not too long ago, Apple had 4 Thunderbolt ports in their devices, no HDMI ports. They removed MagSafe. They had no SD card slot for a while, so Apple already gave you a lot of things back. Tipomaster, and yet USB 2 speeds despite the C-shaped hole in the iPhone, no excuse for that. Well, the excuse is that now on the A18 die, they don't even build in like USB 3 connectivity, so they would have to rely on like an external chip on the actual like USB-C port to give you that speed. The answer, like, do you know why it's actually excusable, Tipomaster? It's because 99% of people buying a base iPhone will never transfer data through a cable anymore. Like, they will airdrop stuff, they will send themselves stuff per email, save it in the cloud, we might be thinking about even people like me who are like content creators, but people who want to work with their iPhone, like capture like ProRes log video on their Pro iPhones, they need faster USB-C, because even AirDrop on a Wi-Fi 7 device will suck in comparison. But base iPhone users, and even to a degree me, like I have my iPhone 15 Pro Max and I use a USB 2 cable for continuity camera. Guess what? It has never held me back. Screen Logan sending a dead emoji. Hope you're fine, man. But welcome to the stream anyway. Maybe you just agreed with me that the USB-A port deserves to die. So that's kind of my little rant on USB-A. Again, nothing too crazy. We are not getting USB-A here. We, of course, again, all the Geekbench results do line up with what we have heard in the past. So those are actually nice uplifts. Like maybe some of us wanted like above 4,000. And I've seen some newer Geekbench for M4 showing like around 3,600. My speculation is that those Macs are now just having some background stuff to do as people are setting them up as their own products. I don't actually expect for them to perform meaningfully worse than like 3,750 or something like that, if they are not burdened by any other tasks. And similar to that, maybe you won't always get like 15,300, but maybe like 15,000, 14,900, something in that range. Again, we have talked about also like the 20-25% faster Geekbench GPU/compute scores. Those also make sense to me. Again, it all makes sense once you actually consider we've actually already had, of course, M4 devices with the M4 iPad Pro. Tipomaster, that's an explanation, not an excuse. Well, a good explanation will be an excuse too. That's penny pinching. True. That's what that's what companies do to attract you to a more expensive option. A penny pinching is not an excuse; it's also an explanation. An 899 phone should have it. But the problem is, can you really dictate that if that's not what the market is asking for? Because don't forget, our enthusiast needs, like for example, the PS5 Pro that I'm getting early next month, like I could argue, oh, maybe a $700 pre-build should have like a Zen 3 CPU based chip, right? Or maybe even Zen 4 or something like that. It's still Zen 2 based, and you know why? So that it can give you perfect compatibility with PS5 games. There's less development effort for Sony, and there's less development effort for developers. And it also helps keep costs down because cash cut down Zen 2 is smaller still than a cash cut down Zen 4. That's by the very definition penny pinching. And yes, of course, the PS5 Pro will have significantly lower profit margins than pretty much any Apple product in recent memory. But I accept some of those limitations when I buy something that isn't like a $1,000 product or beyond, to be quite honest. Like, yeah, there will be some penny pinching, and sometimes it's not about saving Apple a penny on the iPhone like 16. It's so that the people who really need USB 3 speeds, and Apple actually goes beyond most Android devices, with most Android devices only giving you 5 gigabit output, and Apple gives you 10. So again, I fully understand what you mean. It's not like I'm excusing it, but yes, a good explanation in a way will sound like an excuse. So yeah, I guess I cannot help that. Guys, we've been streaming for almost an hour. Small reminder again to anybody who hasn't yet done so, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, sharing it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment in the super lively live chat today. And if you want to support this channel directly, do so with a super chat or a super sticker. Consider becoming a channel member. Shout out to Max Maximus and Angelica, who are Mark Tech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube, or you can become a supporter over on Patreon. Thank you all so much. Notebook Chat does, I guess, probably the best breakdown actually here. So they give you the Geekbench CPU results, the GPU results. They give you some quick reference to how much faster it is to the current generation, which of course we know where it is. We know single core is around 31,000, multi-core is like around 11,000 and a bit more, and in the GPU OpenCL test, it gives you around 30,000. So yeah, those uplifts make sense. They do roughly line up with what we've seen on the M4 iPad Pro, and they are a little bit higher. I cannot tell you if maybe Apple uses any form of newer memory, faster memory. Like we know that Apple, of course, uses 7500 megatransfers memory on the M4 in the iPad Pro, and on the A18 and A18 Pro in the iPhone 16 series. Doesn't say that here. I mean, oh wait, it does have memory frequency? Wait. Why can't I see that? Device memory 10.7, maximum frequency. The cache amount makes sense. No, it doesn't have memory frequency. That was okay. Sorry, I got a little excited about getting potentially more data. And the frequency is the same as it is roughly on the M4 iPad Pro. So no surprises here. And the clusters are also the same: 4 performance cores, 6 efficiency cores. That roughly ends it for this leak. Let's see what comes out of it. I'll of course cover if anybody goes to jail because of it. If the US starts a war with Russia to liberate those 200 poor MacBook Pros. But yeah, that's a very, very fascinating leak. And thank you guys for discussing it with me. I guess there's nothing new here, at least to discuss right now. There is one piece of news that I actually don't want to talk about too much. You guys please let me know what you think of it, because I know a lot of you might disagree with my stance, where I am very much for curated experiences. I would love government intervention when it comes to the App Store and the Google Play Store, mandating lower commission rates, like from 30% down to 20, maybe from 15% down to 10, depending on what level of revenue from the developer we are talking about and stuff like that. But of course, we know a lot of it had been started by Epic Games. First, they just basically put third-party payment processors inside Fortnite for their V-Bucks on iOS. Apple threw them out from the App Store for that. Started long legal problems. In the US, Apple basically won. In other countries, it has been less legal, like lawsuit based, and has been more of like a regulatory oversight issue, where like government agencies have mandated changes to Apple to like start allowing third-party app stores and stuff like that, which of course now in the EU, that's something that I benefit from. Well, there has been a long-standing lawsuit between Epic Games, and Google. And I have to say, if there was any ambivalence about who won the Apple versus the Apple versus Epic trial, there is absolutely no ambivalence here. Epic won, and won big. Google must give rival third-party app stores access to the full catalog of Google Play apps and distribute third-party stores themselves. So Google basically did a no-no, which is they pretended to be a mostly open platform, but behind the back of consumers, they were basically conspiring with device makers to always keep Google Play, for one, the default store, yes, but mostly also the only store. Like, I believe OnePlus was an example, or was it LG back in the day, where Google apparently came to them and said, like, yeah, you know what, you don't need your own store, right? And Samsung was basically, for a long while, especially in the West, pretty much the only major device maker, Android device maker, who was offering their own store. And it seems now judges didn't like that Google claimed to be open but wasn't, which Apple never claimed to be open, so I guess then helped them in a way. And now they're actually forced to open up. Google's Android App Store is an illegal monopoly, now an official ruling, and it will have to change. Tippermaster saying, Maxtech video, and it included the letter metal score. Oh, that's cool. I guess I can look into that. Thank you. Today, Judge James Donato issues his final ruling in Epic with Google, ordering Google to effectively open up the Google Play App Store, with it kind of Android overall. So what are the biggest things? And this is actually starting November 1st, 2024 and ending November 1st, 2027. So I guess they do kind of have a little bit of leeway before they implement it in a perfect way. At least that's how I read it. So stop requiring Google Play billing for apps distributed on the Google Play Store. So they would have to start offering others. It's a bit messy. I don't like this part of the ruling whatsoever. I think that mandating that Google Play billing is at least one option is really, really good for the end consumer. I believe it really keeps like my grandma could buy something on the App Store, even now that there are like third-party billing processors and stuff like that there, or billing systems. I just don't like that. The jury found that Google had illegally tied its payment system to its App Store. Yeah, but it's such a monopoly where I usually say, did the customer really suffer from that? Let Android developers tell users about other ways to pay for within the Play Store. I actually don't disagree with that. Like something similar, of course, has been mandated to Apple in certain regions. Let Android developers link to ways to download their apps outside of the Play Store. Yeah, okay. I always have to say I really like the App Store. I like that Android, for all its openness, still has a central system for app distribution. I really hope this doesn't kill it, but who knows. Um, and let Android developers set their own prices for apps irrespective of play billing. Yeah, I guess that's the smallest thing. Like, you don't have to fit into like one of the 50 different pricing stuff, options that Google gives you. Like, you can technically price your app at 62 cents or something like that. Or it's 69 euro and 42 cents if you are like Elon Musk, I guess, and you have no real sense of humor. Google also can share app revenue with any other person or entity that distributes Android apps or plans to launch an app store or app platform. Interesting, I guess, simply like an anti-competitive thing here. Offer developers money or perks to launch their apps on the Play Store exclusively or first. That's interesting. I guess this is kind of like, oh, you are a platform holder, you have to be a little bit more subdued, because obviously we know, for example, that Epic themselves offers exclusives, whether it's first or complete exclusives, on their Epic Game Store on Windows. Offer developers money or perks not to launch their apps on rival stores. I guess that kind of goes hand in hand with that. Offer device makers or carriers money or perks to pre-install the Play Store. Yeah, I guess. Offer device makers or carriers money or perks not to pre-install rival stores. I think this is probably the straw that broke the camel's back. I think the fact that Google used to do that is probably what got them this kind of harsh thing. If they actually stayed pretty open as they are, but they basically said, you know what, we like Google Play to be the default, but we don't hinder anybody else to offer their own stores, I think they would have been mostly fine, but I guess they aren't. And I mean, we know that because Apple was still in the end fine in the United States. So I guess this is a pretty big W for Tim Sweeney, Tencent, the Chinese Communist Party, like, I guess that, what was it, the Open Coalition or shit like that, that also included Microsoft for some reason, even though Microsoft runs Xbox, which is 10 times more closed down than any Android device. But you can never accuse big companies of not being hypocritical. And of course, it's also all the more funny that we know that, of course, the Epic Game Store does, for example, pay stuff for exclusivity. So the fact that Google is now forbidden to do something that Epic Games does because of a lawsuit that Epic Games started is also a little funny. Again, it's not a terrible decision overall. I think with Android being a more open platform overall, I think it hurts it less than it would do Apple. But overall, I'm just not a big fan of Epic. So I guess if a more moral company had actually started these lawsuits, I might be more in favor of it. But yeah, I guess we'll have to keep track on how all these Play stores develop. How well maybe Epic now brings all their shit back and stuff like that. Obviously, now in the EU, you can kind of download Fortnite again on iOS, but I would never do it, so who cares? Again, this is not a terrible decision. I do tend to be pretty negative on governmental overreach that, in my opinion, might actually end up hurting consumers. But I don't think, given the fact that Google has always kind of made themselves out to be a pretty open platform, in my opinion, you live by the sword, you kind of die by the sword. Apple never pretended to be a fully open platform, so I guess I'm glad that the US allowed them to stay a more curated, more closed off platform. But at this point, I do expect Apple at some point to also have to do all the Europe stuff in the United States. And once they do that in the United States, I wouldn't be surprised if they just automatically do it all over the world. They unify all of their like developer agreements, and basically like all that 2 or even 3 tier system between like what you get in the US or Europe or even like some other countries that are asking Apple to open up will end. But that might still take 2 or 3 years, in my opinion. Maybe longer, depending on if some just become like super protected, protracted lawsuits. But we've seen that this Epic versus Google lawsuit, I mean, it wasn't fast, but I guess by some lawsuit standards, it was reasonably quick. I've definitely seen worse, unfortunately, in the world of like big tech lawsuits where some shit just takes a decade. Epic didn't quite get everything it asked for. It wanted the judge to crack open Google Play for 6 years, not 3. Oh, so this is just a time. So this is not a time limit to implement it. This is the time in which they implement it. So they don't have to open up the platform forever. Okay. I guess I missed that. Let's actually go into detail. It wanted the judge to crack open Google Play for 6 years, not 3. Allow users to sideload apps. Yeah, it seems like judges are very apprehensive to like mandate sideloading fully. Like they really are going that third-party marketplace route, which is very fascinating. And for Google to, which by the way, I kind of am more of the route that if you mandate sideloading, then third-party market apps just become like automatic almost, so you kind of help those companies almost more. So I'm a little surprised by these decisions. Maybe there's some legal thinking behind it that I'm too stupid to understand, but who knows. And for Google to stop being able to tie Android APIs to Google Play, I really am happy that this didn't fully happen, because that would be so shit if we started getting Android devices where you have to first download Google Play. That would be such a shit user experience, in my opinion. So why not 6 years? The provisions are designed to level the playing field for the entry and basically allow for the growth of rivals without burdening Google excessively. Okay. I guess that's a little bit more reasonable than I thought. As competition comes into play and the network effects that Google Play unfairly enjoys are abated, Google should not be unduly constrained as a competitor themselves, basically. Okay, I guess, I can respect that. Yet Amazon, of all companies, convinced Judge Donato that Google's rivals need a helping hand. Yeah, famously, like, company that needs handouts. Even a corporate behemoth like Amazon could not compete with the Google Play Store due to network effects. To a degree, yeah, but also like who wants to download shit from Amazon's marketplace? Right, like, and I don't mean like the Amazon app, I mean like their apps. Citing a key piece of evidence from the trial, an internal Google presentation that suggests that Amazon would struggle with the chicken and egg problem of attracting both users and app. Today, the Amazon App Store, which yes, does exist on Android, has not become a substantial competitor. That's the stuff you find on like the Fire devices. But with access to the Google Play catalog of apps, Donati argues, rival app stores will now have a fighting chance of getting off the ground. So basically, they get to fully benefit from what Google has built across the Google Play Store itself, the trust from consumers, and of course the entire Android ecosystem, but they only get to benefit from that for 3 years. I guess that's a compromise. It's a weird one, but I guess that's why I didn't even think of it that way at first, but it's interesting. Today, Google says the changes will cause a range of unintended consequences that will harm American consumers, developers, and device makers, and Epic is calling it a victory. Nothing surprising here. Maybe I'll read the court decision by myself. I'm not going to read it out 4 pages for you guys. But yeah, let me know what you think. I know some of you really agree with me on like mobile devices should be treated differently than desktops. I know some of you really disagree. I would love to hear your opinions, especially now that we have quite a few people here watching. Let me know. But that's basically it for big news today. There is one thing I really wanted to react to though, and that is I have big respect for this guy, and I've mentioned it a couple of times. Sorry, I should just go to downloads. There it is.
Look, I get.
And that is Drew from Tailosive Tech, because Drew is an OG. He's been doing videos for like what, a decade at this point. And I think he's funny. I think he can be insightful. The way he like reacted like 6 years ago almost to like front page tech and painfully honest tech, like stuff like this together with especially Rene Ritchie motivated me to start this channel. So I have real respect for this guy. However, I have to say, over the last 2 years, he's been on a little bit of a weird trajectory where he's been trying to target like I don't know how to really call it, like lower end consumers, I guess, where he really encourages like buy older devices, buy the cheaper device rather than the Pro. And I feel like he's been really reaching with some of that stuff, where it's not like he unfairly said that the base device can be good or that an older device can be good, but I feel like he's resorted to now really like down talking the better device. And I think it has really culminated, for me at least, now with his outright bashing of the 16 Pro. Just today, like I don't remember if it was on Twitter or on the YouTube community stuff. He like reposted another review that said like the iPhone 16 Pro is like Josephat, thank you. You are very politically correct. And shout out to Josephat. He's also a supporter on Patreon, by the way. And he did recommend that I look at the video. But the reason why I finally decided, and please don't be angry, Josephat, it wasn't even your suggestion, but it was Drew either tweeting or it was in the YouTube community section. He reposted another review by some small channel, 800 views or something like that. And that was like, iPhone 16 Pro is like an embarrassment or an abomination or something like that. And I was like, really? It's just a better iPhone 15 Pro. Like, it has a slightly larger screen. It's a more immersive screen with smaller bezels, so that's one nice thing to have. It has longer battery life. With that longer battery life, it also allows for slightly faster charging, especially in the wireless department. And on the wired, it just keeps up basically with the higher battery capacity and with some higher power draw. It has a faster chip, but it also has better cooling with that chip, which means that either the chip runs faster, it can sustain its performance for longer, it doesn't result as quickly in display dimming, right? It has some nice camera upgrades. They are not big in any way. Like the main sensor is a little faster, allows for some slightly better low light results, allows for 4K 120. The ultra wide is 48 megapixels. Doesn't help it too much because it's still a pretty small sensor, but it does work pretty well in well lit scenarios, especially if you use Pro RAW. It has Wi-Fi 7, it has updated 5G, it has better speakers, better microphones, all that stuff that adds up to just a better iPhone 15 Pro. But for some reason, some people are just like hating on it. Josephat, am I buzzing or is Drew buzzing for you?
Get it? Who's got it?
So let's get started with what he has to say here.
Look, I get it. Who's got enough time to watch this entire iPhone 16 review from some random ginger on the internet? So because most of you are not going to be watching till the end of this video, I'll save you the time. The iPhone 16 lineup, I don't care if it's the Pro Max, the Pro Plus, or whatever, none of them, in my opinion, are worth it. I'm not even going to be like some channels out there that claim that...
So that's already weird. I mean, he will obviously contrast his opinion with others, which is some people like John Prosser from Front Page Tech said, oh, look how beautiful the base iPhone 16 is, buy that instead. I think every enthusiast just gushes over the better sustained performance, especially on the Pros. But yeah, like, and some people will like tell you to buy an Android device. But what does Drew say?
Well, if you have an iPhone 13 or older, then yeah, it's time to upgrade to the 16. That's very brand family. If you want to get invited to more Apple events in the future, sure. You should say like, yeah,
I mean, most people who are saying that aren't even getting invites. Joseph had saying, lol, no, just the sound of the worker bees gathering the info that may be worth covering. Yeah, thank you. Somebody who's actually internalized my beehive comparison, where I'm your queen, buzz, buzz. That's great. I usually say not buzz, but I guess that's the more correct way to say it in English. I say bzz, bzz. Like without the U.
This is the use case for the iPhone 16. I can see why people would buy this one. But after using the best of the best, the cream of the crop, the iPhone 16 Pro Max for the last couple...
1.25 is a little bit too fast. Let's do our usual 1.15.
weeks, I've come to the conclusion that even if you're on an iPhone 12 or 11 or even older, I'm still going to recommend all of you buy an iPhone 15 way before you get to an iPhone 16.
Okay, like this is already like people hold out to update their devices when needed, not because they wait for any specific feature, but they just wait for whatever is the latest iPhone out there because they know that is going to be the most quote-unquote future-proof. And all those features that I listed across better speakers, microphones, Wi-Fi 5G, charging, performance, sustained cooling, performance thanks to cooling, display size, battery life, all those little things. This is exactly why somebody would finally upgrade, not because any of those individual things is like game changing, but once you consider how good, for example, the iPhone 15 Pro was already versus like an iPhone 12 gen device, right? But some people would say like, oh, but after a year of using the iPhone 15 Pro, the battery gets diminished by like 10% or so, right? So why not get a device that has almost by default 10% longer battery life and better cooling that might actually help sustain battery health for longer periods of time? Or if you don't care about battery health, that might give you slightly faster charging, especially like from zero, or especially if you're doing wireless charging. Like, it's so weird. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand the 15 Pro will be a lot cheaper if you buy it right now. But it's not like people who buy like the iPhone 16 Pro are so price conscious that they could never afford that price difference. It's weird.
16 because this is an S year. This is a small incremental.
By the way, S years, look at any like wide poll, and unfortunately, there hasn't been one in a while because Apple hasn't named products as S years in a while. People remember S years usually more fondly than the main redesign. Like the iPhone 4S was remembered for its giant performance boost and its incredible, by the standard of the times, 8 megapixel camera versus the capabilities of the iPhone 4. A lot of people soured actually on the iPhone 4 over time because by the time the iPhone 4 got the iOS 7 update, it notably slowed down while the iPhone 4S performed pretty well still. The iPhone 5S was, of course, remembered as a better iPhone 5, like a 10-15% better battery life, Touch ID, a big quality of life change for a lot of people, and of course one that has been copied or improved upon for years now, and a monumental performance uplift with the A7 chip, which also gave the device very long upgrade cycles. Like, it kept getting more and more iOS releases, and once even it stopped getting new iOS versions, it kept getting security updates. And of course the much better camera as well. Josephat saying S years tend to have updates that are meaningful, not just superficial. And you can look, for example, the iPhone 5 gave you a larger screen. That's nice, true. But at the same time, it actually gave you slightly lower battery life in certain scenarios because it was so thin than the iPhone 4S. It had a more efficient chip, yes, but if you are just utilizing a larger screen on the same, now on 4G, and on the same kind of battery capacity, well, guess what? That will usually result in slightly worse battery life. iPhone 5S fixed that. iPhone 6, of course, had the band gate, and then iPhone 6S came out with 7000 series aluminum that made it much more durable. You can argue how bad band gate actually was, but fact is that the gates were actually all the redesigned products. The iPhone 4, antenna gate, right? iPhone 4S fixed that. iPhone 5, scratch gate for the slate black model. iPhone 5S fixed that with the space gray color and just slightly different anodizing process. iPhone 6, band gate, solved with the iPhone 6S, better aluminum. People who down talk S years in 2024, now that we have so much hindsight, it's so ridiculous to me.
Great, and Apple is doing everything they can with their marketing expertise. And don't get me wrong, they do have an incredible marketing budget and marketing team that makes all kinds of things that are not that different feel very, very different and fresh and new. But after just a couple of hours of using this...
The reason why Apple does that, by the way, is because people who buy it, they might not come from a 17 Pro that already, they might not came from a 15 Pro that already gave you like 2000 nits of peak brightness. They might come from an iPhone 12 that barely had good HDR, that didn't give you definitely above 1000 nits even of peak brightness, and definitely wouldn't be able to sustain such brightness levels. So this is why Apple does talk about features that might even be the same or only slightly improved from last year, and that is because they know that people will come in buying this device who have noticeably older devices, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old products.
Latest generation iPhone, I could already tell this ain't worth it.
Josepha, there's a strong, so basically you're saying, so there's a strong argument to wait for S years? Yes, usually in the past there was. I remember my first iPhone was an S iPhone. It was the 3GS. Then I skipped the iPhone 4 because I bought my 3GS very late in the life cycle. It was 3-4 months later that the iPhone 4 came out. Then I bought the iPhone 4S. Then I bought the iPhone 5, but that's because my iPhone 4S just instantly switched hands. Then from the iPhone 5, I actually skipped this 5S, so that's where I didn't hold on to my own mantra, I guess. But then I bought the 6, then the 6S, and then the 7. And the 7 was actually in many ways by some people called the 6SS, if you remember, right? Which, of course, SS is a little bit of a dirty word, a dirty combination of letters. Yeah, a lot of people said, oh, no redesign after 2 years? What is that? But I was at that point, everyone in my family wanted a new smartphone, so I was getting the newest one and handing down my oldest one. And so I got 6S, 7 in a row, but then I didn't actually upgrade to the 10 because at that point I had gotten used to the 5.5-inch display, the 16 by 9 5.5-inch display. So the 19.5 by 9 5.8-inch display definitely didn't appeal to me with how narrow it was. So I only upgraded by the time the XS Max came out. So now I was kind of on an S year, I guess. And after that, of course, the S branding disappeared.
Let's begin. In the iOS 18 video, I titled it Change for the Sake of Change.
And I have already said that I disagree with that video. I think that change for change's sake, I think people ask for change. They pretend all they want are macOS Snow Leopard releases with bug fixes, or they want only iOS 12 releases with refinements. But then at the same time, they will whine and bitch I'll come down. Ooh. Send me a super chat to calm me down, guys. No, just kidding. Uh, but then people will also be like, "Oh, Apple Intelligence delayed by a month." They will lose their shit about that. I'm like, bro, like, you literally said you don't care about any of it. So, but Apple is not the same. Like, I had a guy today on Twitter who was like, you know what? Under Steve Jobs, there were never delays and they never talked about stuff that didn't happen the same day. I'm like, are you mentally ill? Or something like that. Like for one, the fact that Apple did that, for example, WWDC was actually just like a few weeks before they released the latest version of iOS, back in the Steve Jobs days, before they increased the gap between WWDC and the launch of a new iPhone. That resulted in a ton of bugs back in the day. Steve Jobs literally had a keynote where he stood in front of a slide that listed all the bugs that was fixed in like iOS 4.3 or shit like that. And I'm like, of course there were bugs. Like, why do you think macOS Snow Leopard was known as like a bug fixing update? That's because OS X Lion came out with all those fancy multitask gestures, and it had big updates to the iLife and iWork suites. That's when we got all those like even like redesigned to mission control and stuff like that in the OS. And yeah, a lot of it was buggy. A lot of it was low performant on older hardware. It was nowhere near as bad as what Windows Vista was delivering at that point in time, but it needed an extra year of refinement afterwards. And when you think of long-term announcements, think about, for example, how Steve Jobs introduced the transition to Intel chips from PowerPC. They basically like said, oh, it would take this long. They finished it a little earlier, to be honest, but they also like still gave you like 6, 7, 9 months of like devices where they would launch new products. They didn't launch like 8 new Intel Macs on one day. They said, similar to how the Apple Silicon transition happened, that this will be a process. And to me, that's just so weird when people have no idea about Apple's actual history. They lionize this artificial version of Steve Jobs that never existed. Like, Steve Jobs was proud and he wouldn't admit to problems. Do I need to remind you guys of you're holding it wrong, right? But Steve Jobs wasn't above like making mistakes. Like, he later talked about many of those.
That's another running theme, I feel, with the iPhone 16 lineup. There's a lot of things.
My God, 1080p is so trash on YouTube nowadays. Like, unless it's like the 1080p YouTube Premium with a higher bitrate, if you download stuff, especially, I feel like the download is actually a worse quality somehow than just if you watch it live. It's amazing how bad it is.
They did that, in my opinion, were not because anyone was really asking for it, or not because it really made the iPhone experience better. It was simply, we have to change it so that people feel like something is different. It's probably the first time on Apple's marketing page that I've seen them brag about thinner borders. So like, yes, when you first get your...
I mean, yes, but they talked about the full screen of the iPhone X design. They talked about it basically on every subsequent generation until like it became somewhat normal. And then they talked about the redesign of the iPhone 12. And on the iPhone 15, they said that the slightly more like softer curved borders here that are less harsh like are a big redesign. So don't pretend like this is a one-time thing. And again, they are saying thinnest borders for even larger displays. So they're actually explaining to you why they kept making the borders thinner, so they eventually could give you slightly larger screens without making the phones outrageously big. It's you aren't even reading the entire slogan here.
iPhone and it doesn't have a case on it, it does feel very, very thin on those borders. It's pretty impressive how they can cram those pixels all the way to the edge, but in your day-to-day usage, you're not noticing that type of thing. And data shows that the vast majority of people get a case for their phone.
I have seen the news of 2nm wafers. You mean like that they're $30,000? We don't know for how many orders that is. the source behind it is not always correct. It's not a bad source from what I understand, but it's not the greatest either. So is it more expensive? I believe. What is the cost of 3 nanometer now? $24,000. So that would be like more like a 20% uplift, a little more than that. But we've heard everything from like 21,000 to 24,000, I believe, for a 3 nanometer. So it's even hard to compare because we don't actually have like a super duper correct like number. For example, for what Apple pays now for N3E. Is N3E more expensive or cheaper than N3B? Is N3E how much less does Apple pay per wafer because they are ordering a shit ton of wafers? It's really hard to say, but yeah, I read it. It's interesting. It's not much more than I suspected. Don't forget, it's not just 2 nanometer, but it's also GAAFET, right? So it's a big transition from FinFET. There's another news about Apple skipping it for A19 and possibly M5. Okay, let me briefly look into this because it does sound like something I would cover. Apple. But what would they skip? Like, are you saying they would skip it like to what? To N2P or to A16? Apple 2 nanometer TSMC, I guess. News. 10th of July. Report claims that TSMC has begun trial production of 2 nanometer. Well, but skipping it for A19 is different because Apple wouldn't be skipping it for A19. It just wouldn't be ready for A19. I think that's a different argument. Josephat, you won't notice in day-to-day usage arguments kind of hollow. That's pretty much true for most changes. Exactly. And don't forget that, again, the argument is not, will you feel the difference from an iPhone 17 Pro that already had slimmer bezels than the last gen, from an iPhone 14 Pro that already had slimmer bezels than the last gen, or even an iPhone 13 Pro necessarily that at least had a vibrant ProMotion screen. But consider if you're coming from an iPhone 12 Pro, no ProMotion, no dynamic island, way thicker bezels, harsh edges, very weighty considering that it doesn't have a very large battery. And then of course the iPhone 13 Pro generation was even heavier. And now you get all those benefits, even slimmer bezels, even slimmer bezels, even slimmer bezels, now with a larger screen, now with dynamic island, now a 2000 nit screen, now 2000 nits that are better sustained because the chip is more efficient and the cooling is better. All those things add up that I feel like in a way that actual reviewers have actually talked about it. Like, in all fairness, I just feel like Drew just got his device for a week, used it for his new work stuff, barely felt the difference, and called it a day in his review process.
In that case, eats into the total border width anyway. So the materials on the side of the iPhones are the same. You have
I mean, again, you're forgetting that you're also getting the larger screen.
On the base models, titanium on the Pros. The dynamic island didn't change. The brightness levels didn't change. The USB-C ports are exactly the same. Transfer speeds and honestly charging speeds too. There were some people hyping up that there's faster charging now.
There is faster charging. There's 39 watt peak charging if you are using your device. It's rarely, you will not always be able to replicate it, but it's designed, for example, if you're using your device at low charge, you're gaming, so there's some heat overhead still, and now your device would be able to suck in 39 watts for a little bit before going down to like 33, 31, something like that. Still being above like the 27 of last gen. Yeah, the talk about A19 Pro it's going to be N3P. I know, I've covered that on this channel. The talk about that is that it won't be ready. Like 2 nanometer won't be ready for A19. Not that it's so expensive that Apple would skip it. Apple will still use a version of 2 nanometer, whether it's for M5 or maybe it will have to wait all the way until A20 and M6. But Apple will eventually use 2 nanometer.
on the iPhone 16s, but in real world tests, when they plugged it
And
in,
who knows, maybe the full redesign, because I assume there will be a big architectural redesign when Apple switches like chips from a FinFET design to a GAAFET one. I assume that in order to take full advantage of that node, Apple will change a lot of their chip design. Maybe they just aren't ready to do that by A19, and it will have to wait until sometime in 2026.
to like a 65-watt charge brick, then the iPhone 16 would charge up to a whopping 31 watts, whereas before it only did 25 watts. Yeah, are you really gonna notice that in your day-to-day usage? Especially because
This is also iPhone 16. Plus and Pro models charge a little faster.
now, even though battery life has been improved across the lineup, that means that you need faster wattage to get that battery percentage up quicker.
The battery has not increased by, it has increased by 10% on the base models, yes, but it has only increased by 6% on the Plus and Pro Max models. So an over 10% faster charging rate, technically more like 15-20% faster charging rate, would still give you better charging results.
So in
Just
the end,
basic math.
it's really not a noticeable improvement.
Also, wireless charging is up from 15 to actual 25 watts. So that actually has noticeably improved.
Charging speed.
Which, by the way, Drew has talked about in the past, how wireless charging is basically his preferred way of charging. So I guess he has forgotten that. Really, would Apple be fine with only 5% improvement, though, or do they have some headroom to clog it further or something? There are always architectural redesigns that they could use. They could use faster memory to give you more bandwidth on the chip. They could drastically redesign the GPU in a way that hasn't happened in a while. They could give you more cores on the GPU. There is rumors that Apple, and that way, like what you said, they could clock it even higher than some suspect, that the Pro Max model would have a vapor chamber heatsink. So there are levers that Apple can pull. But don't forget, Apple doesn't care about raw benchmarks. Like, Apple might use any kind of extra clock speeds and die size that they use, or like transistors in general, for like stuff like a much better image signal processor. Like the A18 has double the performance for the ISP than the last gen. So this is where Apple tends to invest its transistors. Apple is not obsessed with benchmarks. People don't understand that. Their deliverance of high single-core results is not because they want high single-core results. It's because they want a generally very snappy and high-performance system. They do not hunt benchmarks. Apple likes to say that they have at least 15% improvement, but don't forget, there is room next year for Apple to give us big redesigns to the camera. There's room for Apple to give us higher peak brightness on the screen, stuff like that. They could even go beyond 120 hertz ProMotion and give us something like 180. There is always room for Apple to boost specs in a way that we don't quite suspect.
Still have the same number of cameras on the back. The biggest change with the iPhone 16 is, rearranging that camera bump on the back so they support spatial video and spatial photos, but how many of you are rocking Apple Vision Pro, which is kind of needed in order for you to view those spatial photos and videos, which I've taken...
that's one change. I guess the base iPhone 16 models, their biggest change is, of course, the much better ultra-wide camera, now with macro mode support, a larger sensor. In fact, it's actually the exact same size sensor as the new 48-megapixel sensor on the Pros. So the real-world difference, outside of very good lighting conditions where you should change into 48-megapixel mode, will not be felt too much. So it's not just that they rearrange the cameras, Drew.
My fair share, and I've watched them on Apple Vision Pro. If I'm being honest, they weren't that immersive. They were 1080p and 30 frames a second, which is, in my opinion, even though it's 3D, far less lifelike than just recording a 2D video that's 4K 60 frames a second. And yeah, I suppose it's pretty cool that you can now record 4K at 120 frames a second, but again, the number of times I do that, far and few between, and I'm recording a lot of videos on
What is spatial video now still limited to 1080p on the new Pros? Did I imagine that the Pros could give you now 4K 30 for spatial? Or was it just for cinematic mode? I think that was upgraded last year or something like that. I'm starting to lose track of modes that I don't use myself, unfortunately. iPhone 13 tech specs. So let's look at the camera. Spatial. Where's my spatial? Video. 1080p Dolby Vision. Cinematic mode 4K 30. Action mode 2.8K at 60. And yeah, well, spatial is still 1080p 30. I guess I can see some of the criticism here then. Yeah, that makes sense. Again, I'm not here to attack Drew completely for everything he says. This was genuinely a tech specs that I wasn't too sure about.
On my phone. So it's handy. I'm not saying there's zero upgrades, but it's not the kind of thing I think is worth upgrading over. You can get very similar effects just by recording at 4K at 60 and slowing that down. Most social media is optimized for 30 FPS anyway. I'm one of the weirdos that likes 60 frames a second, but my opinion, not worth upgrading or spending the extra money over an iPhone 15 Pro to get a 16 Pro just for that feature. The camera layout is of course the same, very similar camera bumps, and honestly, I was expecting the jump to 48 megapixels on the 16 Pro to be more noticeable. You know, I was really thinking like, oh, finally, we're gonna have sensor parity between the main sensor and the ultra wide in order to have that same level of richness and crispness. But even though it's 48 megapixels, it still feels softer. It still feels like there's more noise. It's just straight up not capturing enough light on that ultra wide sensor to make.
Sorry, I had to send a weird message on the vibrator on my 7 Plus is like acting up. My vibrator, my haptic motor. Yeah, there is no I don't know why he would expect that given the actual camera specs. Like, there is still a noticeable size difference here between the main and the ultra wide, so not quite sure what he's getting at. I actually agree with the criticism that I expected more from the ultra wides, but whatever. It's always the comparison with iPhone 15. Very, very smart relay. You are seeing the issue here. But what can you do, right? That's what reviewers will do.
Make it just as good as that main sensor, which means most of the time I prefer taking shots with the main sensor because it just feels so much more rich and vibrant. It has more depth. And that ultra-wide lens, you can tell when you're switching between the lenses, just has a very, very noticeable downgrade in quality the second you switch to it. And it honestly gets quite annoying in my opinion because that main sensor, as rich and as vibrant as it is, it can't focus on things as close to the sensor as before. So like when my wife was testing it out and doing comparison shots with her old iPhone 10, there would be situations where she'd hold both phones up to a sunflower, and the iPhone 10, in my opinion, actually took the better photo because...
Small tip for situations like this. Use the telephoto from far away. That works if you also want an even more aggressive and, I guess, beautiful bokeh depth of field. Or don't be afraid to actually use your main camera from further away, because and especially if you use it in 48 megapixel mode, it's very likely that you will actually be able to still get a lot of quality, even if the sunflower is a smaller part of the image. There is a reason, by the way, when we go back to Apple spec sheet and like that 48 megapixel camera, there's a reason why Apple advertises it. Where is it? Do they not mention it on the spec sheets? Basically, they give you native 1.2, 1.5 zoom, where they say that they even upgraded the basic algorithm for computational photography. So it goes from 24 millimeter to what would it be, 28 and 32 or something like that, and 36, I believe, and then you can do 2x, of course, with 12 megapixels. So in that way, the main camera, people are afraid to not use the entire main sensor, but this is why Apple has created those modes. They know that you cannot get as close with the larger the sensor is in a small package like the iPhone. That's just how optics work, unfortunately. So in my opinion, while I do understand the complaint, it shows a little bit that he's just not super comfortable with all those different modes. I would suspect that comes from the fact that he has just switched so many phones around, and then he ended up with the 15 Pro, but then he mostly ended up using it for work, that he kind of didn't get to fully experience like 48 megapixel cameras. Like, it's hard to say. I don't even remember it had an iPhone 14 model. But I'm just trying to tell you, there is a reason why the main sensor is as big and high resolution as it is. It's because you aren't always designed to use it fully. For example, when we look at action mode, right? That one runs at 2.8K, so it zooms into the sensor a little bit, but that's what gets rid of shake, because it still has actual pixels around it that it can utilize when like a lot of stuff happens on the screen. Yeah, like that is why you get larger sensors. You're not supposed to use edge to edge every single pixel there is.
Because it could stick with its main sensor, but when you switched over to the 16 Pro Max, the phone is too close to the sunflower, so it does that macro mode thing where it switches to the ultra-wide, which is still an objectively worse quality lens. Even though it's 48 megapixels, it's just not capturing as much light, it doesn't have as much depth of field, it doesn't feel as vibrant, and then it's cropping in on top of that because it's not taking advantage of the full 48 megapixels. And besides, when you take a normal photo with the ultra-wide lens, it still crops it down to 12 megapixels anyway, unlike the main sensor, which now defaults to 24 megapixels, but that was the case on the iPhone 15 as well. So there is literally side-by-side comparisons where I guess if you're the average consumer, you may not realize it, but you're probably taking a worse overall photo because this phone is having to crop in on an ultra-wide sensor rather than just stick to using the main sensor like your older phones used to. And maybe the iPhone 16 is better at that, but it's still got a macro mode, which means the phone is constantly jumping between, oh, maybe I'm too close to the subject, I should switch to the ultra-wide, which in my opinion just makes the camera...
Okay, sorry, I had to type a response. It's just my iPhone 7 Plus just bugs around a little bit, so I missed actually a few things. First, I agree with his complaint that the automatic switching to the macro mode on the ultra wide is actually sometimes unintuitively aggressive, which doesn't help. So it's a complaint that I have, that why I have mostly turned it off. I actually, like, after like my phone reset itself, like reset the setting after a beta, I didn't bother to turn it back off again, but I understand the complaint. However, again, this is a complaint that is fixable in settings, so that's what I missed with Drew. Then I missed actually, for the first time in a while, a super sticker. Max Maximus sending us a €1.19 super sticker with love heart eyes. Thank you so much for being able to join. I assume you're probably working again and cannot type fully, so but then again, nobody can be a stupid typer like me and try to type shit on my ancient iPhone here. Realizing Mark needs to start making skits so we can fully switch over. I guess I'll leave that to Drew. He does it pretty well. And Josephat saying, I'm sure old Drew would have said, just take a step back a bit and use the main sensor. Yes, I think so too.
Experience overall worse. And that brings me to camera control. Oh boy, do we have some thoughts on camera control. So something I've always loved about
when reviewers like that say we, I know what they mean. It's not even pluralis majestatis, it's just a joke. But it makes me always feel like Gollum. Like, it's like, precious, we have thoughts on camera control. Our long fingers cannot reach the iPhone Pro Max nicely around to control camera control. And our fish-greased fingers are not recognized by the sapphire cover on camera control. Oh, precious, do we have thoughts on camera control? Like, that's what I think about when people say, like, oh, we...
about Apple is that they're not like first to a technology, right? Like usually
By the
other
way,
companies
realize
that
there
are more
goes your
innovative
skit.
or more cutting edge will roll out a feature like an OLED display or an ultra wide lens. But by the time Apple gets around to doing it, they're usually the ones that get it right. They figured out how to make it like simple and seamless and intuitive, and they get the user interface and the software implementation better than everyone. That's what I used to love about Apple, but camera control, in my opinion, is the antithesis of everything that I thought Apple stood for. Of like,
I find it funny that everyone who actually does like better understand cameras, like they understand that camera control isn't perfect, of course. Like it's a smartphone, it's really hard to find a button position that is better than the power button. You really don't want to get rid of the power button in favor of camera control. They understand how difficult it is to implement any kind of like button control over stuff beyond like simple click and shoot. And I think that actually like professional photographers are in some way like the most understanding that the real value of camera control is not adjusting zoom, it's not adjusting exposure. It's about two things. First, it's about the click and shoot experience, and second, it's about adjusting the new photographic styles, because those are much more difficult actually to adjust than exposure or zoom on the large screen. So yes, precious, you just have to click and then you softly press and then you slide up and down and then you try to put your finger into the ring, but no, precious, they took it. Okay, I'm done here. Realize, seeing the Vision Pro, that thing needs to come down in price. Yeah, I really think it's so cool. My problem is I have my PSVR 2, so I guess my gaming VR needs are met, but I really get tired these days from VR. I probably need glasses. I probably needed them 2 years ago, but I get so well by in life just reading, surfing the web, watching stuff, work, whatever. Like it just bothers me that I would buy what lenses so I could just wear them inside my VR glasses.
this through.
I mean, I guess I could buy like the size lens insert inside Vision Pro, but that feels like a waste of money.
We got it right, and we may not be first to something, but we're the best at implementing a particular feature, and I cannot for the life of me figure out how Apple was okay shipping a phone with camera control. And not even that, they didn't even leave it on just the Pro iPhones. I thought that would have made more sense, like Apple trying to differentiate between the pros and the non-pros.
I actually expected that to happen too, but not because I thought that camera control ended up being bad. Again, my exposure to camera control is still just a one-time go to the store, but it worked pretty well for me. I didn't even have the shake that so many people describe, because it's like an indented button, so to actually click it, you have to kind of press into the device itself, and that creates a shake that could mess up your focus in the end. But again, my exposure to it was small, but very positive. So I wonder if I actually used it for a week or so, would it turn so negative that I would start disliking it, or would I be turned more neutral on it? It's really hard to tell.
Inherently just feels like something that a pro photographer or videographer would care more about. But no, they added this on the entire...
Guys, we've been streaming for about 2 hours. Small recommendation to all the YouTube guests again. Subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. You guys see I love interacting with a lively live chat. You can support us directly. Okay, I'm doing it like this. You can support us directly today by sending a super chat or a super sticker, my precious, directly in the live stream. Or you can become a channel member right here on YouTube, my precious. You can become a channel member on the Mark Tech Pro Max tier, like Angelica and okay, fully lost Gollum here in the end. Or you can become a supporter over on Patreon, I guess.
iPhone 16 lineup, which I'm sure adds cost and complexity to the manufacturing process. Now, every single case maker has to account for this, and they're adding sapphire glass to it, which is not cheap. Stainless steel around the border.
Artificial sapphire glass is cheap, especially on such a small thing. It's very cheap, believe me.
It's indented. It gives taptic feedback when you give a light press, but then it's still a physical button. So now you got to count for it with water resistance and everything like that. So many design challenges, I'm sure, that came.
So many design challenges that Apple met.
Around with camera control, and all for what? A confusing, hard to use button that, in my opinion, is more likely to ruin your photo.
By the way, and I've said that to like the ultra wide images, that like, oh, you can just use the main camera, step a little further away, zoom in, maybe use the 2x zoom. Right? With camera control, if it really bothers you in some ways, just use it on double click and keep the action button as like camera shortcut if you want to.
Lots of other people have already pointed this out. Because it's indented, you have to push harder down. You have to be more precise.
I experienced some of the shaky photos at first, particularly in portrait. Okay, yeah, okay. I guess that's because your entire hand would shake a little bit, right? If you use it like this, yeah, I could kind of understand why it would shake. But if you were to use it like that, let's say that's the power button, right? Like, I'm sorry for the moaning. That wasn't supposed to be sexual, I promise. Like, yeah, I guess I could see it shaking, but I also see you just getting used to it over time. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a crazy, like, novel way. Like, it's just an extra button. It gets a lot better, but also it's great for short videos. True, I've heard that. I'm not like, when I take videos, usually it's very deliberate, but I guess if you are like a TikToker who just like wants especially like instant portrait mode video, I guess that works really well with it.
With how you're pushing this button compared to any other button on the iPhone, and because of that, there's more likely to be camera shake. There are more situations now where if you try to take a photo or a selfie or whatever with camera control, you're more likely to shake the phone at the exact moment that the photo is taking place. You're much better off just using a volume button because it's protruding. So
But with the volume button, the camera needs to be active first. If your screen is off, that means you would have to wake the screen, whether it's tilt motion or tapping the screen, and then swiping or long pressing the camera button down below, or you configure the camera to the action button, which what I do on my 15 Pro Max. But that unironically is terrible in portrait mode, because if I reach up that high, that means in portrait mode I actually end up covering part of what the camera can see with my index finger. The camera control unironically solves that, so it's much better for portrait. While it's not super duper comfortable, nothing is on a smartphone. It's not a big bulky camera that's round and juicy, I guess. But yeah, like, they're just realities to using smartphones that I feel like these reviews ignore.
You can feel it and click it a lot easier, or just press the photo button on the screen like everybody else. But if that wasn't enough, Apple also had to turn it into this trackpad, which I had a hard time believing back when it was just a rumor, but this year, a lot of the leaks and rumors actually ended up being quite right. Like, yeah, the idea is you swipe back and forth to zoom in and out, but you cannot zoom or have as much control, ironically, with camera control as you can with just zooming in on the regular display.
Again, you control it that way because your fingers are supposed to be like that on the device, right? Like, sure, you can keep holding it and then zoom in into the image, but once you're kind of locked into position, like you would be with a professional camera, that's why you're supposed to move like that. Again, and zoom and exposure, I actually agree. They would probably still work better on the main screen. But when it comes to photographic styles, don't forget, that's not as good. So instead, you just do this, and you move through your photographic styles, which are now, of course, much more powerful thanks to the A18 chip. And all that undertone stuff and whatever, and mood lighting and whatever Apple integrated into it, that now switching between those is much faster there. So it's literally a feature that is coinciding with a specific new functionality of the new image signal processor. So we have chip hardware, we have camera control button hardware, and we have the software where it all interacts.
Hey, you can do this on older iPhones, of course, as well, but it's much, much easier and more dynamic and far more flexible to just slowly zoom in and out with your 2 fingers on the primary display. And then camera control is in this kind of awkward, hard to reach location. Makes you have to hold your phone kind of awkwardly, but in order to activate the zoom, it's not activated right away because they've got more software updates to fine tune it down the road. But you have to lightly
and I
press
still
down.
want to say, like actually clicking on the screen like this, right? Like that also can create a shake unless you're already holding your phone like pretty steadfast, and now you would have to make sure that you are not covering the camera in any way. So usually you just end up holding it kind of like this, and then actually clicking on the screen does create a shake too. So like it is not worse than the previous solutions.
Down, not all the way, and then because it's such a small trackpad surface, you can really only inch in on your photos and videos a little bit at a time. And I get that they're trying to emulate this kind of retro camera feel from back in the old days. I've used older camcorders and older DSLRs, okay? But all of those little physical zoom knobs that they had on the top were way better than this because they actually had a protrusion and you could...
I mean, they were way better because they were a protrusion, a big protrusion, a dedicated piece of hardware. It has specific rounded stuff here that makes it easier to grab. It's even a softer touch material where you're supposed to grab it. Here there's literally like what would it be called? Like, I guess another protrusion that Drew seems to like. God, I'll protrude him something here. Like, yeah, of course, a dedicated piece of hardware. It's the same bullshit. It's like, for example, a larger screen will help you game better on a phone or a tablet, right? But it will not be as good as a dedicated controller. That doesn't mean we cannot take steps forward to improving gaming on a smartphone without turning it into a full-on controller. And the same goes with camera stuff. We can improve camera control, literally, not the button, with more buttons, with more features, without turning your phone into a bulky, dedicated piece of hardware that is focused entirely around one sensor and the lens system on top of it, and then I guess some soft touch material where you grab on and some protrusions to control it.
Slide and hold that zoom and match the zooming speed as it went in. Whereas this, no, it's like your finger becomes this stupid little inchworm when you're trying to zoom in and out. Doesn't give you as much control as the primary display. Is more likely to wobble the phone as you're taking photos and videos. And more importantly than all of these features, it's simply not intuitive. I had family visiting from out of town this week, and I also let my sister try this because lots of people came up to me that are outside of the tech community, of course, that are just people in my personal life, like my father-in-law who was also in town as I was getting the iPhone, and they all asked me like, hey, you got the latest iPhone. How is it? What does it do? And I genuinely had the hardest time ever trying to convey to people like, it's bigger, the screen's bigger than ever before. And
I mean, that's, you know what? If you tell people the screen is bigger, the battery life is better. If you play games, like especially for the younger crowd, they will perform noticeably better. Some of the cameras are slightly improved over the 15 Pro, but a lot more improved if you, for example, are coming still from a 14, 13, or 12 Pro, right? Like, all those things are not difficult to mention to people without forcing them to use camera control without explaining them how to use it first. By the way, whenever people say, oh, I don't know how to use it, that's because a reviewer who has already used the device handed you that device. If you actually were first using the device for yourself, then the software would start explaining you stuff. The first time you open up an app, there's the splash screen icons for everything. The first time you would open a phone that has a brand new button, that's explained. Or even like how the action button looks in the settings app. It's visual. It's informative. While if you have already set up a device and the device thinks you already know how to use all of that features, now it won't explain it to users. And guess what? You're probably not as good at explaining it as you think you are.
They look at it and they're like, oh, yeah, okay, that's big, I guess. But then camera control is the go-to, right? Because it's like, well, this is definitely not on your Android phone and this is definitely not on the previous iPhone. But as soon as you try to hand this thing to anybody who's not a techie person, they have no idea how to use camera control. Like, you hold the phone to them.
By the
and
way,
they'll
they do for the main thing that it does, and that is click and shoot.
try to zoom in and out, it doesn't work, and I'm like, no, you have to press lightly on the button, and then they tap it lightly, and I'm like, no, you have to tap, but hold the finger down, but don't push too hard, because then it'll start taking a photo. But then if you double tap it lightly, that activates other features like the depth effect and the exposure effect, which, you know, you can do on any iPhone much easier and simpler just by tapping the display, swiping up and down on whatever you tapped, or adjusting the depth of field if you select portrait mode. But instead, Apple's trying to bake all of these complex, intricate features into this one little button that has multiple ways of interacting with it, and no matter who in the family I tried to show this feature to, they could not get the hang of it.
Yes, this is this is something that one of you said, who said that USB-C 2.0 speeds are inexcusable. And I said the reason why it's very much excusable or explainable is because most people will use the USB-C port for charging or for some data transfer that might be so basic, like for example my continuity camera, that the speed itself beyond USB to 480 megabits won't matter. And the same thing goes for camera control, because camera control by itself will be used for what? For click and shoot. And for people who know how to leverage it further, there is the swiping and stuff like that for more precise controls. And similar to that, if you want faster USB-C, better USB-C, then you'll get the Pro iPhone. Here it just happens that you already have camera control, but you might not fully utilize it regardless of which model you buy, depending like even how many photos you shoot and how comfortable you are with learning new tricks. And the same thing goes for many Pro iPhone users who might buy a phone with USB 3 speeds, but will never actually utilize it. For one, the included cable is of course USB 2, which sucks. That one, I fully understand the criticism. I think a USB 3 capable device should come with a USB 3 capable cable in the box. But even then, like, even if you still had a USB 3 cable, if you only use it for your nightly charge, you have never utilized USB 3 in all your ownership of a USB 3 capable iPhone. And the same goes for camera control. There is no shame in just using it for click and shoot. And if you want to use the more advanced tricks, then learn them.
Not impressed by it. They couldn't get it to activate or do the things they wanted to do, and that always made them just default to zooming in and out on the primary display, just like every smartphone.
And again, also, Drew just basically showed us that he doesn't zoom in with the sunflower, which makes me question, why are we even putting that much value into how easy or not it is to zoom? I never really zoom in on my cameras in my camera app. I usually do a zoom post taking the shot, so I can maybe align it a little better and stuff like that. So I just have more pixels to work with. Yeah, I mean, what am I even talking? And again, the same goes also for like exposure settings. It's like, how often do regular people even change exposure settings in their iPhone main camera? Like when? Like even I don't do it. I mostly rely for more advanced editing on just capturing a Pro RAW image and then editing it afterwards. I don't really like to set a completely fixed exposure that will limit some of my data capture in the camera app.
Because that's intuitive. Pinch to zoom makes sense. Like a baby can figure it out. Even if they've never spoken a word in any language, they can be like, oh yeah, I pinch to zoom in and then reverse pinch to zoom out. And I could understand some of these little techie...
Joseph, you're saying they might allow scrolling in apps. My question is, for one, don't forget, they're adding visual intelligence to it. So that's too many functions on top of each other. But also, like, scrolling inside apps. I remember, like, I had the Galaxy S9. I actually had, like, I dual wielded for actually quite a couple of years. And it had the fingerprint sensor on the back. And on the sensor, you could actually swipe and down. And never in ever all my years of using that Galaxy S9 did I ask myself, oh my God, it's so convenient to swipe on the back of the device and not the front. Like, I guess like that could be an extra feature, but that would be the very definition of a gimmick. realizing the battery stuff and cooling is more interesting than the button. Yeah, but you have to understand, people latch on to visual stuff, even reviewers. Like, reviewers will pretend to be above that, but they're not. Like, what are the two things he kind of covered here beyond the cameras? Because cameras have kind of become part of every iPhone review, almost 50%. Or in the Verge video that we watched, I remember, Rila, you complained a lot about how much they talked about just the camera. That was like 75% of the review was camera stuff. So what did Drew talk about? He talked about a slimmer bezels and a larger screen, so something visual. Then he talked about cameras, because cameras are mandatory to cover. And then he talked about the camera button, because that one is visual and it has something to do with the camera. He did not talk about performance first. He did not talk about sustained performance thanks to better cooling first. He will mention some of those things, but I will have some disagreements there as well.
Key things if this was restricted to just the Pro iPhones, but no, they literally had to give it to the base models as well. Again, because Apple probably knew there's not enough changes, we need to make this feel like a more substantial upgrade. That's why they gave the iPhone 16 lineup so much better colors, is because that was really the headlining feature of the whole iPhone 16 lineup. Do you think everybody's upgrading just so they can have
I mean, have you, like, I always, whenever people mention like almost like conspiratorial thinking, and they will say like, you know why they added this feature here? And I'm like, have you considered that last year they added like color-infused glass to the iPhone 15? But maybe the initial process behind it was not very refined, so they couldn't add a lot of color to the glass without maybe making it look muddy or dirty, right? And now they figured it out, so now they are happy to deliver you gorgeous, vibrant colors. Have you considered that there's no conspiracy theory here?
Action button or a camera control button? No, the primary reason so many people are talking about the new iPhone 16s is because, yes, ultramarine is very pretty.
Yeah,
but at the end of the day,
ultramarine
you're going to look at that color for a couple minutes and then forget about it or put a case on it, and then you spend all the...
Which is funny. That's kind of the opposite of the Max Tech review, who almost in like his first points mentioned that your phone looking different matters a lot for everyday use. And I was like ready to like hit my head against the wall when I heard that.
This extra money for an iPhone that really has so many similarities with the iPhone 15 that it's not worth considering, in my opinion. But of course, the big feature, the big reason
I pre-watched this video. He thankfully does not keep talking about camera control until the very end of the
was really interested in the 16 Pros was this new audio mix functionality that claimed this has studio-grade microphones now in the iPhone. And I've been very impressed with the studio-grade microphones in my MacBook Pro, but unfortunately...
Guys, I have great microphones in my MacBook Pro as well. Can you guess what microphones I'm using right now? It's definitely not the one right in front of my mouth. They're just realities to hardware, where microphones can actually be of very good quality, but they're small. They are further away than you would like them to be. Like, your device shakes a little more than you would like it to be because it's such a small thing and stuff like that. Like, yeah, they might be studio grade by certain standards. I mean, it's not a defined standard, but yeah, those are better microphones. I've heard side-by-side comparisons with like the Galaxy S24, the previous generation iPhones. They are better microphones.
The microphones in the 16 Pro have sounded god-awful. In fact, I cannot tell the difference at all between the 15 Pro and 16 Pros, other than this one software feature that's also been added to the regular iPhone 16s as well, even though Apple claims there's...
But I don't think that's bad for you to enjoy it. I just think that's not something that reviewers should be encouraging. Like, I love my blue titanium iPhone 15 Pro Max, and I use it in either my clear case, or I use it without case, or I use it when I really know I want protection in my MagSafe case. Like, true, I fully understand that, but I'm just saying that that's not what defines a product through and through. If you like, it might, if you come from a relatively recent product and not much else beyond the color actually changes. But if you're coming from a 3, 4, 5-year-old device, then a lot more than the color has changed.
there's a hardware physical difference between the mics on the 16 Pro and regular 16. I tried recording videos with it, and people...
I think Apple actually said that both of them, like they said that the 16 Pros have better microphones, but they both get the same software feature because they're using some AI stuff from the A18 and stuff like that.
Noticed. It was quite obvious, especially when you selected the studio mode option. Like, it's really only impressive if you're recording things in a super loud environment, because then it's like, okay, this audio went from unusable to, like, audible. Like, yes, I can hear what the person is saying, but it definitely is no replacement for a designated recording mic. That's why I'm still using my Zoom for audio recording now. But if you try to use the audio mix features for, like, a regular talking head video like this, and you have a sound-controlled environment, I think it is a gross over-marketing term to say these microphones are studio grade, because...
So if you don't know about Dan Priestley, he's basically one of the most amazing Tesla executives.
It's so dang bad when you compare it to a real microphone, and honestly...
Yes, that's just the size. I'm not even gonna entertain that stuff. It's, yes, like the best microphones, unless the entire iPhone becomes a giant microphone, will be worse than a dedicated microphone that is just microphones. That mic test can be right. It sounds way bad. No idea. He might have put the iPhone very far away, had to artificially boost the sound. Like, it can sound that bad. Maybe the echo was like really exactly in the corner where the iPhone hit. That shit happens. The iPhone is not a magical replacement for a professional microphone. But guys, if I put this microphone here, listen. I now start sounding not like less loud. I also start sounding worse because echo becomes more of a thing. The algorithms of the microphone now struggle more. Now imagine if I do that. Now not only do I feel the need to scream, but now the quality will be already noticeably worse. And this is just as far away as my arm reaches. Can you imagine what it means for an iPhone that it has 4 little microphones that combined might make up, what, 1/8 of the actual microphone technology inside here? Like, can you imagine that difference? Of course there will be a qualitative difference.
If you're in a controlled environment, the best audio setting is still probably the default one, which doesn't even sound that much different from the last generation iPhone, okay? So I think that was grossly overrated, overhyped, and was a complete disappointment because that was the main reason I was curious.
Yeah, really. Now my mic sounds terrible, and this is the latest $350 Shure MV7 Plus. That's the nature of mics. They hate echo. They hate being far away in a way that isn't directional, right? If I talk to my laptop, but my mic is over there, it hates that. It doesn't even like if I talk to it and it's far away. And then I would have to also change settings. There are microphone settings that are better for like a spatial thing. There is the very directional setting that I'm using right now. It's all the same, but it then becomes way much worse on the microphone on the iPhone because it has so much less hardware for it.
Curious about upgrading. And frankly, I know there's a lot of talk about Apple.
Yeah, and really, you are correct. He always says, he compares it to the last gen. His argument for that is that he wants you to basically buy the 15 Pro, like either refurbished or on discount, saying that those devices are so close, right? He doesn't want you to buy magically a 14 Pro or something like that. He just wants you to buy a 15 Pro because he says this device is so close to the 16 Pro, you might as well save the money. That argument would be fair, in my opinion, if by the end of the video, he actually gave you a comprehensive like analysis of what is actually the resale price of the iPhone 15 Pro right now. Like, how much money do you actually save? What are the main benefits of getting a 16 Pro? You will actually get through the video. Where is it? How do I use... Can I not do transcription stuff on like, he barely mentions the battery like in this video. Well, I guess we'll know by the end of it, but I think if I looked it up, I would see how little he talks about it. But like, he'll basically ignore that.
intelligence, but it's just not out, and I think similar to all these other features,
Okay,
it's
Apple
likely being
Intelligence
overhyped
missing.
and over-exaggerated. Siri's still
I
gonna make
guess it's
mistakes.
valid criticism for Apple's marketing. It's not valid criticism for the device itself. In my opinion, Apple Intelligence is not just an iPhone 16 feature. It's also a feature for the iPhone 15 Pro, for every Apple Silicon Mac, for every iPad with an M1 and above.
There's still going to be problems with it, and personally, I don't think you should buy a whole new iPhone based on the promise of maybe one day Apple Intelligence will be really helpful. I mean, be honest with yourself. Most people who are upgrading their whole iPhone just for Apple Intelligence...
Well, I think you could probably get an iPhone 15 Pro discounted where like maybe a company wants to clear out its inventory, and it might be actually $300-400 cheaper than the 16 Pro. But don't forget, this really depends, right? Can you find that offer? How trustworthy is that offer? So yeah, it's possible, and like I guess it could, like I would give such a recommendation to a person. I would say, look, what other alternatives are there for pricing? Maybe if you can be happy with refurbished, that could work out pretty well. At that point, you might also wait 2 or 3 months before we get our first refurbished iPhone 16 Pro models. And by the way, when people said that like the iPhone 16 Pro basically failed in its early sales, I just looked up iPhone 16 Pro wait times in Europe here. And every single iPhone 16 Pro Max model in every color and in every storage configuration takes between 3 and 4 weeks to order. So from like November 1st or like October 30th to November 8th, right? So 3 to 4 weeks, literally. So it cannot be that bad. Josephat, he also argues people should buy 14 Pro and 15 non-Pro, which is so weird because he complained about the 15 Plus not too long ago being like a $900 device that doesn't support Apple Intelligence. Yeah, and really, yeah, the price difference will be different everywhere. Like, it's hard to
are doing
tell.
it for that pretty animation where it just lights up the edges of the display. You'll get sick of it after a while. You'll get bored with it and probably go back to not using it all that often because, again, large language models are hard to fine-tune. They're going to make mistakes left and right, and you can probably do most of what you're looking for.
Which is actually fair. Like, downplaying Apple Intelligence, in my opinion, is not so bad if you do it from the perspective, you know what? Your phone is probably already fine, right? If you do it from the perspective, oh my God, it's so trash in comparison to ChatGPT, that's one thing. That I don't agree with. But if you're like, oh, you were fine without AI, you should be fine still without AI. But I still don't get why he would recommend the base 15.
An Apple Intelligence just with off the App Store apps like ChatGPT or Gemini. So I think it's one of the most overrated, like over-marketed things.
Don't go to heaven, real like. Don't go into the light just for an iPhone 15 Pro discount.
In Apple's lineup right now because the iPhones don't even have it in the first place, and when it is out, it's probably not going to be as great as Apple is saying it's going to be. But another reason I was considering...
Now that's just rambling, like in a 25-minute video, and I know this is a 2.5-hour video at this point, but like I feel like it's a little disrespectful to just babble on about what you think a feature will be. Like,
considering upgrading, as Apple claimed that they put better heat sinks in these iPhones so that this year they should handle
this one is a big no-no.
Way better, but literally on the drive back from the Apple store as I was first setting up my phone, I was already getting overheating. Like, it wasn't shutting off, but the display was dimming and it was dropping the refresh rate, and I wasn't even using it as a personal hotspot yet, which I did.
Yeah, that is so bad for me. Like, really, like, first setting up a device is so intensive, and now you're telling me you're doing it in a car, probably with a very unstable 4G or 5G connection, because he has repeatedly said that his area has terrible coverage, right? So now I'm supposed to like worry that the iPhone overheated while setting it up originally and doing so either over cellular or maybe the crappy 4G that Teslas can catch. Like, no, bro, that's not a regular use case. You cannot compare that. You cannot use that to evaluate the better heat sink or whatever.
Do somewhat regularly if I'm out and about filming things and need to have internet access. And when I use my phone as a continuity camera with my Mac.
By the way, we have literally guys like the Petapixel reviewers who are like, oh, you know what? The iPhone actually captures 4K 120 video longer than pretty much any pro camera we have. But thankfully, Drew knows from his basically unboxing in the car experience that like, nah, you know what, it's not that much better. Realizing he said claiming like we don't have teardowns. Yeah, but even that, for example, the Galaxy S24 Ultra has like 60% larger vapor chamber than the Galaxy S23 Ultra, but the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 uses more power than the 8 Gen 2, and the way they build the vapor chamber, it seems to be not very good at actually like, I don't know, like actually dissipating the heat through the entire device. It still seems to be mostly stuck around the chip, and then around the battery. That's not too good because the battery builds up its own heat. So the Galaxy S24 Ultra actually in some ways had worse sustained performance relative to its peak performance than the S23 Ultra, despite a much larger vapor chamber. The same could happen to Apple. But like, yeah, so there's the objective fact on which he would be wrong, and then there's the subjective testing on which he has done the worst kind of testing.
With a MagSafe puck as a charger, you know, just two fairly heat-intensive tasks, it did start overheating and dropping frames after about 90 minutes of use. So even...
By the way, that is not necessarily overheating. Dropping some frames is not necessarily overheating. That would be just like underclocking. Like in that scenario, overheating is when the device actually, in my opinion, shuts off, or at least dims the display so much that you know it would shut off basically instantly if it hadn't done so. But dropping a few frames here and there is literally what will happen to every heat-soaked device that doesn't is connected to some kind of active cooling. It happens even to any gaming phone that doesn't connect like a little fan on the back.
No, I'm sure there's some statistics showing that the iPhone 16 can handle heat better than the iPhone.
Literally every statistic that actually tested, except for one Geek Event test that doesn't actually measure heat dissipation. It measures peak power consumption and then equates it to heat dissipation. But we've been through that, guys.
On 15, but they still can overheat if you push them to their limits. I don't think it's that noticeable of a change.
Really, it's both subjective and objective testing that says that. Yeah,
you're still going to have to be cautious with like some kind of thermals or the heating environment where you're using your iPhone, whether you have a 16 or a 15. So I just say go ahead, save yourself some money, because you can find the iPhone 15s for much cheaper now. That's why Apple's not selling the 15 Pros anymore, because they know they'd be way too good of a deal. But if you're in the market right now, and
you could have said that about literally every year. Like I remember when people were like, "Oh, you know what? If you like that 48 megapixel camera in the 14 Pro, it's not that big of a change, and 14 Pro gives you like even less battery life than the 13 Pro. So you know why Apple deleted the 13 Pro? Because it would be way too good of a deal. By the way, we've talked in this video about stuff like LTPO display supplies. There are other reasons why Apple cuts off like Pro model production, like in a way they don't do for the base models. There are other considerations.
And you're willing to spend somewhat of a premium on your next iPhone because you want it to last a while, and let's say you want Apple Intelligence features, or you care about ProMotion, or you want to have the action button, you can find iPhone 15 Pros refurbished and renewed now for about the same price as a base model iPhone 16, and personally I think the 15 Pro is like better.
Don't overheat.
You still got a telephoto lens on there, you get the titanium and the action button, the faster USB-C speeds, you'll get Apple Intelligence whenever that feels ready. So that's probably the one to buy right now if you're in the market. Can't really recommend anything in the iPhone 16 lineup because I think it's just gimmicks on top of gimmicks, and Apple desperately trying to...
Guys, we've been streaming for about 2.5 hours. I'll wrap it up when this video is wrapped up, so probably in half an hour. Oh my god. But as always, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it, comment live. I love interacting with you guys in the live chat. Send a super chat or a super sticker as a small donation to support this channel. Become a channel member right here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon if you want to support us in the long-term process.
Come up with features. It's like, yeah, you should upgrade for this though. You want that faster MagSafe charging speed, even though you have to buy all new MagSafe cables, and you have to make sure that the charge brick is big enough to support that faster speed. You're not going to notice. You're going to charge it overnight like everybody else. The thinner borders on the 16 series are really only noticeable in side-by-side comparisons, which you're probably never going to do. The speakers are the same. The IP rating is...
So he barely mentioned battery life, I guess, because in his usage, he probably doesn't run out of battery. I know he has like his new like almost like social media ambassador job for some kind of startup that deals with trucks. I assume e-trucks, giving his EV interests. But yeah, not really giving us any battery stats is just mind-boggling to me.
It's the same. Front-facing camera, there was literally 0 changes this year. I guess now you get the Tetra Prism, like 5x telephoto on the smaller Pro this year. That's, I guess, cool. I took some photos with the 5x. Yeah, it's not bad. It's not substantially different than the 3x in my opinion, but a lot of YouTubers swear by it and are
By the way, guys, I know I've recommended this website in the past. But like, just so you know, like a little bit of what is actually going on. So again, shout out to Pixel for actually pretty good peak brightness levels. Here's battery life. This is the iPhone 16 Pro versus the 15 Pro. So an hour and 20 minutes more. That's nice in their comprehensive testing. And then look here, 16 Pro Max. Let me add the 15 Pro Max, right? An hour more. That shit adds up over the long term. I promise you guys. And you can actually see here, like 2 hours longer web surfing. Don't forget that it not only gives you longer gaming times, but it does so while sustaining its performance a lot better. So actually, look at its performance ratings. Now, I don't like the test that they use, but still, Apple has promised better heat dissipation for this generation of iPhones and thus better sustained performance. And it has delivered exclamation points. The CPU scored 78% of stability. The GPU stability has increased from 74% to 90%. So yeah, if you ever think that those are just completely the same, whatever, and completely you can ignore those, nope. They're just objective data here. Like the way these drops happen, and they will happen because it's still a passively cooled smartphone. There is an improvement here. And where's the 16 Pro Max? I actually don't think, I think the 16 Pro Max actually didn't improve in their testing as much as the 16 Pro. And by the way, their Geekbench scores are a little bit on the low side right now. Don't know what happened there. The CPU scored 78%. Oh, those are the same numbers. Did they not test those devices separately? Interesting. I guess. Wait, we were in the 16 test before that, right? Yeah. Okay, so I guess the same improvements. Or maybe they just copy-pasted the results from one to the other, but there is an improvement here. And by the way, small pet peeve of mine, thankfully they don't do so here actually on this and Tutu test, but they do so sometimes when they mention Android devices, and Tutu is not comparable across different platforms. So yeah. And also, by the way, don't forget, the 16 Pro Max actually runs at a higher resolution even than the 15 Pro Max. It's only slightly, because the screen is a little bit larger. So there's actually more stuff that it's dealing with in general, even if it's ever so slightly.
Or just like, oh, 5x just like changed the whole world of portrait mode photography. Okay, sure, yeah, I'll give you that. 5x is kind of cool, I guess. But a lot of you are probably wondering, well, Drew, if the iPhone 16 series just straight up does not feel worth it to you, then you must be returning the 16 Pro Max pretty shortly, right? Because the return window is about to end. Well,
okay, this is a story that doesn't matter to us. I actually forgot how much of the video it actually takes up. This is how he explains he has a new job, so he uses devices more intensively. Previously had the 15 Pro. Now, of course, the Pro Max with a larger screen sounds nice, right? And he has a sponsor that asked him to do case stuff. There it is, the case here. I guess that's some battery. There, the casing here. Those cases, right? And basically, they offered to pay for his 16 Pro Max so that he could show off the device in it. And he isn't considering switching away from the 16 Pro Max because setting up a new product, maybe like a 15 Pro or whatever again, would actually be uncomfortable for him. And he gave his 15 Pro just to his wife. So yes, his 16 Pro Max is pretty much sponsored, but he says he wouldn't actually recommend anybody really buy it. Basically, if you can get it for free, it's good.
Amount of money. I probably should have asked for more, but because of my pesky morals, I was just like, I only want enough money to cover the price of the iPhone because I don't want.
By the way, to potential sponsors, if your product is good, I don't have problems asking good money from you for a sponsor spot on this channel. Yeah, so feel free to hit me up. I'll ask a fair price. I might agree to your first offer if it's already good enough. I'm not completely greedy. But if you actually have a product that I could actually like either test, maybe it's a software product that I like get to experience for a week or so before I give you like the sponsor, or it's something you sent me in and I can review a little bit, that's also fine. But I will always be, of course, truthful.
Want to be one of those that did probably play
Okay,
into
that's what he works for now. So he managed social media there.
I still would like to review the Pixel phones, but my wife is also.
So he isn't saying he will switch his SIM card to other devices. He might just keep several devices at once to review something like the Pixel.
And my only slight issue with it is it's made my phone so big now that some of my older phone mounts don't even fit anymore. Like, my phone no longer wirelessly charges in the Model 3, but I'm pretty sure that's just an issue with the Model 3 because it's not MagSafe. Like, wireless charging still works with the Taurus phone case on a Qi mount or like any MagSafe accessory. It's just in the car, it doesn't.
I guess the only part of his case review that we're watching is the one where he is critical.
Charge anymore, but I've noticed that, hey, my phone is running a lot cooler than it used to because the wireless
because
chargers
it's
in the
not
Tesla
charging.
overheated the phone constantly. So that's probably better off.
By the way, yeah, again, so his experiences with actually, like, now I actually am forced to imagine, did he wirelessly charge his phone on his way to home on the crappy wireless charger in the Tesla Model 3 that already overheated his iPhone 15 Pro, and he wanted to simultaneously set up the device on crappy 5 or 4G? Like, reviewing a device's cooling capabilities based on that is like saying that because I'm not as strong as Stitch, right? Which, how much can Stitch carry, right? It's like, what, 1,000 times his weight, but literally not 1,000.1 times or something like that. That now my strength improvements that I got through the gym are completely worthless now. No. There are steps in between.
Off, but I appreciate Taurus for being so flexible. They didn't give me a script. They didn't say you have to talk.
Like, by all faults from the Verge review, at least they said, like, we tested out 25 watts wireless charging and the phone didn't even get hot, which they said was very impressive. At least that sounded like a fair impression. Okay. Let's see.
About these points, really scheduled unsponsored content after this, but that's why I'm holding on to the 16 Pro Max, even though I have a lot of complaints with it. And if you're spending your own money,
excuse,
then I
whereas some people might call it an explanation.
Don't recommend upgrading to it. But if you already bought the phone because you're like, no, Drew, you're wrong. Well, there's some phone cases you can check out that I'm using personally that I think are pretty great. So thank you once again to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching.
We need that many supporters at some point. We grew pretty quickly last year, and throughout that period, I had some incoming like Patreon supporters. Most came in, left after time. I did, of course, my like 4-week hiatus where I lost pretty much everyone who was still there. But it's, now that we are a little bit more to a regularly scheduled program, we should be building up a larger support base. So get on Patreon right now. Okay. That should finish it up for about today. I apologize for probably screaming in your ear, given how sensitive this microphone is, because it's not a smartphone. It's a designated microphone, pretty professional even though I use a USB-C cable for it and not... I have no idea. I always forget what that port is called for audio, for like that thick port for audio. That is definitely not 3.5 millimeters. Yeah, but yeah, like Drew's review here is just weird in my opinion. Like, I feel like he's basically making the point it's not a big of enough upgrade over the 15 Pro or Pro Max, depending on which model exactly you want to compare. but he didn't even highlight the actual improvements that way. He basically didn't talk about battery life at all. He said stuff like peak brightness is the same, but then ignored the fact that a big problem with the previous models is they didn't actually sustain that peak brightness. So thanks to better cooling, you might actually do that now. The faster performance, I mean, yeah, he might not test any games or stuff like that, but I think some performance testing would have been at least in order. Like, show us at least the Geekbench results. Do like the laziest possible thing. At least it's better than nothing. And yeah, and then he just downplayed better speakers, better microphones, which again, all those things still happen in the confines of a small smartphone. Even the 16 Pro Max is not going to be a designated microphone or a real speaker like a HomePod. So I'm just confused by some of the choices. I'm not gonna say I will start hating Drew because of that, but Josepha, thank you for like recommending this video, because I was actually really like pissed off at it for several reasons, and to know that you guys were actually interested in me watching it, that helps. Joseph saying, right, he focused in his use case scenario, which is fine, but doesn't make a review. Exactly. You cannot extrapolate from what he says to even to all content creators, I would say. But even beyond that, I would just say the general audience is like completely lost here. Like he mentioned, like, oh, it's not intuitive to do all the scrolling and settings adjustment through camera control. At the same time, Apple tells you that you can do those things, but throughout the I believe there was like an interview with an Apple exec recently, like they even said basically that just clicking and capturing an image is the main idea of camera control here. And I just don't understand why why it sounded almost like that swiping and zooming was almost like primary rather than just the click and shoot functionality. Yeah, so, and I guess you guys just added so many good points as well. It doesn't even make sense to just keep analyzing it. It's an L. This review is an L, which I know we all take L's from time to time. So do I. But yeah, it's disappointing. I think Drew can do better. I always, again, if you want to watch something entertaining, actually, and I know that Drew can be absolutely fantastic. Like, his pixel rants are pretty legendary. It's unfortunate that his best stuff now, I've basically said, is like 5 to 7 years ago now. But yeah, highly recommend that. Of course, I've already pointed you guys towards like his reviews of or his reactions to like Front Page Tech a few years ago, and to everything, or Painfully Honest Tech, I believe they're called. Yeah, so Drew can absolutely be awesome. He still can and does deliver very good content. I just really dislike this specific review. So don't send him any hate or anything. I mean, we're a much smaller community here anyway. He is an absolute OG, but it's a shame to see pretty lazy review, in my opinion, from him. That's about it for today's video, guys. I believe, yeah, 2 hours, 45 minutes. Thankfully, not quite 3 hours. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Thank you for reacting to everything with me, from like the crazy MacBooks leaking for Russians to like Google's loss with Epic, to seeing just what other content creators keep saying about the iPhone 16, 16 Pro. Joseph saying, waiting for LTT's review. Oh my God, man, you're killing me. But yeah, that might be worth it down the road. What is Linus Tech Tips even creating recently? I've looked that up on some recent tests. It's like literally not a single video of theirs appealed to me. Sensible tech upgrade, another AMD sponsored video, reacting to your best tech results. I think he took like some kind of test or whatever. Cheap motherboards or expensive motherboards. I guess that could be interesting, but not for us. Like, we don't really care about framework here. Building PC, I'm done roasting setups, I'm fixing them. I broke my son's gaming PC. Now I'm making him fix it. Yikes. Roasting your worst setups. 2 weeks ago, 3 days ago. No, where was it? 13 days ago, roasting your worst setups. 10 days ago, I'm done roasting setups. I'm fixing them. There is a sense of humor here. Yeah, I guess the PS5 video is like the last one I would be interested in. That was 3 weeks ago, and then I believe he was somewhat positive to the latest iPhone for some reason. So we'll have to see how he actually reacts to that. And let's see, did they already unbox it or something like that on TechWiki? It's not TechWiki. What is it called? Oh, Bluetooth 6? Are there Bluetooth 6 specifications out? Because I do care about that. Bluetooth 6. Bluetooth 6. What does it say? Bluetooth 6? Why is everything in German? Oh my God, I don't want to change the language. It's always such a pain in the... I guess I'll watch the explainer at some point later on. Seems like it's improving the transfer quality or whatever. Just briefly looking into German. Oh yeah, they're offering similar features now to UWB. And thank you, Josephat. It's short circuit. They have way too many channels. This time iPhone users are missing out. Google Pixel Buds Pro. Yeah, we are missing out by a new product, even though we've had AirPods Pro 2 for like 2 years. Apparently, Android users weren't losing out before that. Your Wi-Fi doesn't have to suck. The monitor I should have waited for. This guy is just like changing monitors like I change socks. Picking out my new iPhone. Okay, so I guess they did like an unboxing, but I hate their short circuit videos. They're just not detailed enough for me to react to, and sometimes I just get irrationally angry at one stupid uninformed comment they say during it. But yeah, and it's also such an unfocused channel. Like, there are car reviews in between, but not enough to actually do like really good comparisons here. Like, you can see the more you swipe, the fewer car reviews you actually find. Yeah, like, way too many channels, way too many employees. At this point, he should have maybe invested in some other channel than trying to lead all of them simultaneously, having to show up in so much freaking content. It just feels diluted at this point. Yeah, but that's about it. That's definitely it now that my voice is giving up. Thank you so much for tuning in. Last shout out to doing all the YouTube jazz, subscribing, liking, sharing, leaving one last comment. And please, guys, please leave a comment after the video has been uploaded. I know you guys love interacting in the live chat, but it helps tremendously if you leave a regular comment. It really helps a lot. You just have to stay a couple of seconds after the video has finished streaming, and then you just leave a regular comment. Please, that helps a lot. Of course, beyond that, if you want to support this channel directly, you catch me live, leave a small super chat or super sticker donation. Consider becoming a channel member. Shout out to Max Maximus and Angelica, who are Mark Check Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. And you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. Bye, chat, I guess. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Let me know what you would like to see me cover next time. This is Mark.